whatever your honest, maybe it's easier said than done, but like if you can find an honest, true voice of your own, a visual, a style that is true to you that you're going to enjoy making, because that's going to come across. But it's almost like it should be easier in a way to be able to be like, all that stuff, anything you're not bothered about, out the window. Don't worry, you can know a bit about it. It's good to know a bit about typography and design, layout, all this stuff. But if you really want to be just drawing in using painting in brushes, or drawing in pens, or whatever the style is, drawing in pencil, stippling, cross-hatching, whatever it is, focus on that and just put out. I mean, the classic thing is put out the work that you want to make. Show the kind of work you want to make. Even if secretly at home you're doing watercolors of woodland creatures or whatever other thing, it's like if that's not what you want to be doing out there, it's like, well, keep that to yourself and put out make the kind of work you want to make it in a style.
Hey, how's it going? You are here for Heavy Art Talk. As usual, it's your host, Lee. Today, I am very excited. I have Richey Beckett joining me. Richey is an amazing illustrator who has done work with some of the biggest bands on the planet. He's also a really humble dude, and he runs an Instagram page called Danov Inc., which I'm excited to chat about with him too. But a couple of the bands that he has worked with would be Mastodon, which are hometown heroes of Atlanta, Metallica, Cave In, Pearl Jam, the Pixies, Foo Fighters, and a ton more. Without further ado, Richey, how's it going, man?
Lee, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure on my end, too. What have you been listening to recently?
I've been relentlessly listening to the new Jesus Lizard album.
Okay.
And it's, as a band from the, early 90s, who have they haven't made a record in something like 20 years. And in that period of time, every band under the sun has tried to rip them off openly and knowingly and been like, yeah, we're kind of doing the Jesus Lizard thing, Loads of bands I love,
Yeah.
Including bands I probably played in. Everyone's tried to do the thing that they did and achieve the sound they achieved, and they're so influential in a beautiful way. It's how music and art work, that's great. But I love the fact that 20 years on, I think it's 20 years, pretty sure, they come back and Dwayne Dennison has just been like, hold my pint, let me show you how it's done. And they've just delivered what could be, it's hard to tell now because it's fresh out the gate, brand new, but they've delivered what could be their best record.
Really?
I think that's what they think, which is fucking cool. I listened to a long form interview with Dwayne Dennison the other day, and I think he was under the notion like this might be, they've just sharpened their tools. Every member of that band is better than ever in every way. And so, yeah, I listened to it the day it came out, and then listened to it 3 times a day since, and checking in with friends of mine who are equally psyched. They've all been like, yeah, I'm listening to it again too, So that's the rack. It's called the new Jesus Lizard record. I'd recommend highly. It's fucking amazing.
Moving on to something else. Let's see. When did you start taking on professional commercial illustration? I don't have a clear idea of how long your career has been.
Me neither. I'm often I think about it. I'm like, what is time? I don't know anymore. I have. So the trajectory was, the cliff notes are that it was, I went to art school, I finished art school, I got seduced by music for 10 years, played in a band for 10 years, didn't make any art, and then around 2010, let's say 2000, I was trying to figure this out a couple of days ago, say 2008, around then, I started picking up commissions to make artwork for bands, t-shirts initially, for touring bands, because I was in a hardcore band who were touring around Europe and the UK. I made a couple of shirts for my band out of necessity. Other bands saw them. I started picking up commissions on the road, and then coming home from tour with all these commissions, and then going back out on tour, doing commissioned work whilst traveling. it just kept snowballing and getting more and more until it just ultimately took over from just time and responsibility versus what I was putting into the band, and ended up reaching this juncture doing the t-shirts. Eventually a band would be like, hey, you reckon you could do a record cover? I'd be like, fuck yeah, I'll do a record cover. And just these little steps, and then once you've done a record cover and you're putting that out there, other people are like, hey, this guy does record covers, and then so it kind of just very organically grew. But also I was fortunate to know a shit ton of bands and just be in that world and that community, because I have a lot of people ask, this is the reason I was thinking about it. I think I got asked the other day about it by, I assume, a young illustrator, saying like, hey, how do you get into this? And that's often the thing. It's like, what's your route in? How do you connect to musicians or whatever? So, but I was very much in that world, so I knew a lot of people. And to be honest, like a lot of people who initially commissioned me were friends from that community. Yeah. So yeah, started doing t-shirts. That escalated to doing record covers. I say escalated just because that's kind of like a higher stakes thing. Like t-shirts come and go, record covers are more substantial, a lot more pressure. There's just a lot of art direction, a lot of ideas, a lot of responsibility. But I started doing that, but I was still kind of like on the road touring and trying to finish artwork at the back of the tour, taking over the back of the tour bus, commandeering it, and be like, guys, not the party room anymore. This is my studio now. I've got like my printer under one arm, my scanner under the other arm, literally setting up a little art room at the back. And then literally, I remember being in London touring with, I can't remember who it was. Could have been like Raging Speedhorn, maybe, playing in London, and being in this stinking classic London backstage room, just covered in graffiti and just grimy as hell. I'm like, okay, guys, I need this space. Everyone's like getting Larry and drunk around me, and I'm trying to finish a record cover. I was trying to finish a record cover for a band called Victims. It's actually, no, this must have been after Speedhorn, because it's Gaz from Speedhorn's band, or a band he joined at in Stockholm. Amazing band, but they were on Death Wish, and I ended up, this was my first interactions with Jake Bannon, who is now a good friend of mine, and we've collaborated on many things, but this was me coming as someone who'd been a Converge fan obviously my whole life, and then suddenly it's like, oh shit, now I'm making a record cover that he's now my kind of a contact art director, because he runs the label this is on, and now I'm like figuring shit out with him whilst I'm in this backstage room surrounded by drunk people who I love. But I think that was definitely a clicking point for me. It was like, I'm trying to finish this really important piece of artwork in a backstage of a club, about to go on stage in 5 minutes, and I'm trying to, the ink is still wet, and I'm trying to scan it in and send it off to one of my heroes, who was incredibly, like, Jake was so generous with his knowledge and ideas he was incredibly tolerant of my stupidity, and he was like, really gave me a lot of good advice the whole time, and still does, so that was something I was super thankful for. But I think that was probably a turning point where I was like, okay, I've been given this golden opportunity to pursue this now. If I keep this train rolling of like picking up more record covers, I'm already working on a label that I really love for that one, and but I can't do it under these compromised conditions, because I'm not going to be doing good work. And anyhow, that kind of carried on, and then I eventually 2010 was in a position where I was really at that fork in the road. It was like, we're just about to put a new album out. It's like, either I go on this touring cycle now for the next 2 years, and I'm definitely not going to be able to make the art. I might be offered opportunities that I can't take on art-wise, or I jump ship off the band that I've already invested 10 years into and take that second chance that I didn't know I would necessarily have to pursue artwork full-time. So thankfully, with the support of the other guys, because they were super cool about it and had kind of seen it happen, I did that, and started working full-time. Although I say working full-time, I didn't start working full-time initially. Like, I had to still hold down terrible jobs and things, to make ends meet, because it's not like I was earning enough to live from straight out the gate,
Yeah, it can definitely be difficult. I guess curious, like when you're like working with Jacob Bannon, even like today, do you have like some examples of like the type of critique or like feedback he would give you on like a piece? So if you like showed him some of your art that you're working on, and he obviously is somebody that you guys have mutual trust, like is there an example of like a time where he like improved it because of his feedback that you can think of?
I think I think he's comes from a very technically minded standpoint. He has an incredibly sharp eye for detail with things, and is just very intensely. I think of this as just being very technically well versed in delivery of things. I think also because he works in the capacity of not only being a visual artist, but also running a label, kind of running a band, running several bands. Like he's the guy who's organizing a lot of this stuff. And I mean, Death Wish, he has an empire of things that he's organized to, being someone who is just insanely productive and conscientious in the way he works. And the he's like a total machine. Like I've gone out to Roadburn, and he's been out there with Thomas Hooper as well. Those are like guys like peas in the pod in this regard, because they'll be both. Everyone's out partying, and they will have been working at the convention all day, selling art and making screen prints and that. And then everyone else goes out and they stay there all night doing the same thing, and they're there first thing in the morning doing it, and put everyone to shame. But to answer your question, I remember, so even on something like that, it would be more not so much about the art side of it, because I did a few things for Converge as well. Then after that, and I I kind of anticipated. I was like, is this right for this? Like, I know this band so well, I know his art so well. Is this right for them? But he'd be like, no, I want you to do it in your way. That's like the whole reason I hired you to do it. So he wouldn't really give any so much art direction on the nature of what I was creating for them. It would be very much like, you do your thing. That's why I want you to do it. I want it to be you. But in terms of the delivery of it, he'd be very in tune with like, oh, if you run like a sharp filter over this thing, I'll just tighten it up like by 1 pixel or something, and it'll make the print tighter. And if you do this and this and this, these like technical little processes that I wouldn't have a clue about, and in terms of how to scan the thing in, how to just, the delivery of it, and how to just get the quality as high as possible and make it just functional and good. Often just that last minute thing where I was saying to my wife earlier, I often feel like I kind of will spend months as if I'm crafting like a giant trifle, and it's like put all this work into making it look really immaculate, and I'm kind of like soaking the trifle sponges overnight and doing all of these things, and then as I go to walk in the room, I'll be like, oh, and just drop it on the floor. Like I feel like often I put a lot of work into a project and I don't quite know the last stage to deliver it.
Tricky. Yeah,
it's hard. That can drive you insane, those moments of like, because if I didn't have a deadline, I'd probably go on forever until I have like, I always think of it like I'd have just a plain completely black sheet. I would just be like, never stop stippling and shading, and until someone's like, no, step away.
Because like I look at your work and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if you're underselling it, but like I look at your work and I'm like, man, this guy is very masterful in his restraint, and he knows what he's doing.
Well,
it definitely feels like that looking at your posters and stuff. It's unreal,
thank you.
Man.
Well, I would say, okay, yeah, I can be quite self-deprecating, and it comes from a real place, that self-deprecation, because I do see those flaws and faults and things, and I do struggle sometimes to. I did a little sort of ask me anything thing the other day. I was on like a long train ride, and I put it out on my Instagram, and I had a few questions coming from people which I was felt kind of upset about my own answers, because they seemed so negative, and I was surprised. I was like, because it was like, what's your favorite part of the process, or what's your, what part is it the drawing or the finishing? And my instinctive answer when I dug into it was like, neither of them, but they're both kind of excruciating, or what's the piece you're most proud of? And I'm like, am I proud of it? That's like an alien concept, like I'm not, which is not true, because I probably am if I approach it from the right place and think of it in the right way. But my instinctive reaction is often like, oof, it's like a lot of the work I make, when I finish the actual drawing, I just once I've scanned it in, and then I'm kind of, because most of it ends up going through the process of being colored and screen printed or whatnot, I'm only maybe 3/4 through the process at that point when I finish the drawing. I'll just throw it in a drawer and never look at it again. You know, I'll take like one photo of it so that I've got something to share, some content, and then I'll like throw it in a drawer and I'll be like, put it under my bed and not look at it. But then maybe years later, I'll stumble on it and be like, oh, that wasn't so bad, you know? But it takes that division, it takes that time. I know that's like definitely a very common thing for artists, musicians. It's a classic scenario in music that musicians will, and I would be the same. You make a record and you spend so much time with it. You're like, I don't listen to my own records. Of course I don't. This is what people say. They don't listen to their own records and they're horrified by the idea. But on the rare occasion, you see it happen where someone will get them on some like classic albums thing or something and play it back to them. They're like, oh yeah, it's fucking rules, of course. Apart from the only exception to the rule was my wife Jo and I watched the Classic Albums episode about Paul Simon's Graceland, and we reference it often because he's listening back to, I think, the title track just by himself in the studio, and they bring all the stems up and he hits play and listens to it, and he just pauses and he just goes, it's perfect. And it's like, man, okay. I mean, it is. He's not wrong. It is perfect. But that quote now comes up a lot. Just that it's perfect. Usually sarcastically, but not all of us have the confidence of Paul Simon. So.
Oh man, but I think one thing too, though, is it seems like sometimes folks that are the hardest on themselves, not that it can be really measured easily, but they're also some of the greatest appreciator of others' art. And I feel like with what you're doing with like Den of Ink, where you're bringing in artists that you like, and then they talk about their inspirations and influences, like it's a really cool thing. Like I've been digging through it, finding new people, and just also getting the insight of other artists. In some ways it's kind of similar to what I'm doing here, just in a different place. And I really love that. Yeah. But to that point, and I want you to chat about that, but like you have a very specific like rendering style. And do you find that you look at someone else's art and they maybe have a completely different type of rendering style, maybe one that's like very loose or like very gestural, and you're like, oh, that's the stuff. And that's not like what my natural inkling is. Like, do you ever feel like that?
Yeah, it's complex because there's a difference between, one of the things, the way I think of art and mark making specifically, and I feel like a lot of artists in my immediate circles, not geographically, but stylistically, would think of it this way. It's a little collective arsenal of tricks that we accumulate over time throughout our lives. And you'll never get to the end of them. There'll be infinite amount of them to do. And something I find exciting is when you'll see between those artists will sometimes you figure some things out yourself. And there are things that I might have figured out when I was like 8 years old, which I still do. There might be some little thing that I had a point where I was like, oh shit, if I stipple these slightly closer together and more dense, it looks darker. Something as simple as that, or if I cross-hatch this way or whatever the little bit of language is that you discover, and then you're like, cool, I've got that forever now. That's in my pocket. I'm going to keep moving. Like some little adventure quest computer game thing. You're just picking up all these little trinkets and skills, and you can use them then as you please. And you do that your whole life. But then occasionally, the coolest part, and this is one of my sort of, this is how art works kind of things, is you can do it, you can nick them from other people too, but it's just the nature of art and music and all of that is how it is. But you can sometimes see in someone else's art, you're like, wait, what did they do? What's that cool little thing they did? And especially if it's something that's like the smartest way, that you get those artists online who do like hyperrealism stuff, and some of it might be like pen and ink hyperrealism or whatever. It's fucking cool and it's impressive, but when you're like, this took you like 3 months to draw, and you're fundamentally like a human Xerox machine. I mean, it's amazing. But what I'm getting at is that if you see a little time-saving it's not even about time saving, it's about economy of how you're like, oh, this artist has done this weird crosshatch pattern that looks like the texture of tree bark, but it's actually really simple, but when you step away it looks like that texture
or
by some little
impressionism
trick.
like thoughts.
Or like you can do a thing where, say for example, okay, it's a good one I nicked from there's an artist called Tim Vigil who makes a lot of really brutal kind of erotic comic art stuff. It's always like, you need to go to this hidden Facebook page and log in and verify your age and then go through the secret porthole into this other realm to see this art, you know? But it's good shit. But something that I think I kind of nicked from him, which is he draws a lot of ivy, you know, like in graveyards, just like ivy leaves. When you look at it, he's not really drawing the ivy leaf so much. Like the ivy leaf is like a little triangle or something, but he's drawing the shadow of it underneath, you know, like a black mark underneath the little thing. So it's like, oh, you're not actually drawing the thing, you're drawing the shadow of the thing. And if you smash in loads of those little dark patches underneath the little V shape of the ivy, it's like so simple, but it's so effective and it looks amazing. And it's like he'll cover gravestones and all of this stuff in this ivy. And when you look at it closer, it's like very incredibly primitive. It's kind of like a Mike Mignola style thing, you know, where he's just drawing the dynamic shadow stuff to make you think there's something there. And it's not even, it's genius, you know. I don't do a lot of that, but I definitely, that's the kind of thing of like seeing a little, whoa, I see what they did there. And it's like, and especially when it's like an economy thing. But I think the economy stuff comes more in my mind from comic book art, which I'm not even a comic book guy at all, but I love you know, like the classic sort of Jack Kirby era comic book guys had to learn ways to translate something really simply and quickly because they're in the bullpen being like, you got to turn over like 10 pages today and you're going to be doing that 7 days a week. So they're like, okay, I need a bunch of explosions, so I'm going to use negative space in this certain way to generate, you know, the Kirby crackle and all of that stuff. It's like actually really crude and simple, but looks killer. So it's like once they solve that, they're like amazing. I don't have to draw all of these million things, you know? Yeah. It's good shit.
100% with you. And like, I mean, there's obviously the time saving aspect too, but as an artist, you develop faster by creating more pieces than spending, 3 months on repetitive motions, because you're not using all those other parts of your brain that are, sketching, construction, inking. Like there's so many separate skills to create a final piece that, if you're trying to get better faster, in my opinion, the worst thing you could do is to go after something like the 3-month hyper realism of a face. Because how much is it actually true drawing time? So I don't know. That's just my opinion. Is like drawing skill in itself is, that's probably the hardest to learn. And then rendering, I feel like you can always get better, but if you're not good at drawing to begin with, you're just rendering shit. So.
Yeah, and also it's like what you ultimately want to achieve. Like I feel like I've seen painters out there who do quite realistic art who've taken it to this point and then swung back towards a great example that I'm always excited by is that I don't know if I'm going to pronounce his name right. Do you know that painter Mark Migori who does the cowboy western scenes of the cowboys going through the desert with those huge clouds? Incredible, phenomenal artist. And I saw a thing. So he clearly knows. He's done. There was a portrait he did of his wife, and it's like the most stunning thing you ever see. Just like this beautifully perfect, elegant portrait of a beautiful woman reclining in this, house. Amazing, like technically masterful. And then he's continued to make these giant paintings of the cowboys on horses, and he goes out. It's just amazing shit. He goes out into the desert and does a full photo shoot for reference, hires out these people, photographs it all. But he did a thing recently where he showed his process, and he did a bunch of videos saying like, hey, I'm at this point and this I usually, it was fascinating stuff, how he renders, how he builds it, and then how he's going to get in and add things. It was just all super super fascinating. But he's at a point where he could render this perfectly realistic version of that painting if he wanted, but in the foreground, the plant life that he shows, which are kind of cacti, kind of not, there was a point that I feel like he said, he was like, none of these are really real plants. They're kind of my impression, what I think plants are out there and might be. He could have gone out and photographed them and meticulously, accurately rendered these different cacti and flowers and things. But it's not. It's like almost these alien-looking weird plants that are just his own impression of it. And I can tell to him that's kind of the most exciting part of the painting, I think. It is to me, you know, I'm like, yeah, there's cowboy on a horse, immaculate. The clouds are kind of stylized, but also pretty realistic. But these plants he's making are the most exciting part. And then further than that, he's adding strange colors into it. So there's like bold purples and pinks. And then on this, if you look it up, the last major painting, you know which one it was. He finished it very recently, and he posted a bunch of process of it. And it's like classic him, just a bunch of cowboys tumbling through the desert on their horses in Arizona or something. Or maybe, I don't know. But if you look in the foreground, there's these crazy looking weird alien cacti. And then there's a section where it's just these huge blobs of color. Like, it looks like he's just testing out his palette. It's like just a blob of purple, a blob of pink left there. And the whole time I was like, is he going to fix that? Is he just going to leave that as it is? And I was like, I hope he leaves that, you know, because it's fucking cool. And it just looks like he's tested out the paint. It doesn't fit with the rest of the thing at all. But it's the most exciting part of it because it's so at odds. It's so weird. And sure enough, he just left it in there. Didn't even make a big comment about it. I haven't heard anyone really comment about it, but it's there. It's just like these big, beautiful blobs of paint, you know? So my point being that he's got to this edge of like achieving, it's not like hyper realism, but it's like a pretty realistic form of painting. And he's like, it's boring. Like, that's not enough. I need to now pull back or over here, you know, and make my own weird distinctive mark and make it something that's him, that only he would do, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of full circle. That's what I mean with like somebody who's like an artist is someone who's always chasing what excites them. Mm-hmm. And somebody creating a prompt, not that I want to go back down there again. Yeah. That's there's no effort there, so it can't be art. So I think to create art in general, there has to be effort. Like, I don't know how else it could be, you know? So, right. And the effort of the journey, people evolving, devolving, like maybe breaking down their style, simplifying it, you know, that's what's fascinating. And even if you don't like Picasso or artists like that, you know, some people, it doesn't resonate with them. You know, I went to Spain and I saw his work when he was like age 14. And it's like, yeah, if you're creating stuff at age 14, of course, by the time you're 70, you're going to be doing stuff like this.
Great
you know
example.
What I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's in seeing Picasso, like that much Picasso's work in Madrid and Barcelona, as well as oh my God, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, Goya, you know, in person was amazing. I don't know if it's really translated into like changing my work fundamentally, but it made a big impact on me, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting, that thing of, I mean, seeing art in person. I had a couple of experiences in the last few years that had a weird effect on me. One of them was seeing Francis Bacon. I went to a Francis Bacon exhibition a few years ago, and the thing that kind of blew my mind about it, apart from just the scale and the ferocity of some of the paintings, as you'd imagine, and the colors and everything about his work, but there was a few of them. There are certain paintings of his, like the one with that crazy cardinal bishop looking dude on that throne with the cube structure around him, with it kind of screaming. I don't know what screaming bishop. I don't know what it's called.
I'll put it in if I remember.
Something like that. So he's but that painting, I've seen that my whole life and been like, oh yeah, that one. What I didn't realize was this was and you could look at it and be like, yeah, he kind of just knocked, it was like some crazy moment. He made this character and did this thing and put that weird cube thing around it, and it's cool. But he was clearly obsessed with this image, because when I walked into the room where that painting was, there's like 5 or 6 different versions of the same thing that look almost indiscernible. So if you pick up a book, you see it, you're like, oh yeah, I know that painting. But it's like, no, that wasn't just that painting. He made it over and over and over again. And like, just this insanity of obsession. And it, to me, just really validated the painting, or the many paintings, so much more, because it wasn't just an accident that he stumbled on. It was like, oh my God, you were really sure about the structure and colors and the layout and everything about this painting. He had this itch to scratch. And it was similar with, I mean, I know he did a lot of triptychs, but you will see them as collections together, so you will know that there's 3 of them. But many of his paintings, you go into the room and be like, holy shit, there's actually a whole bunch of them. And I had a similar experience more recently. There was a Rossetti exhibition in London, and it wasn't just Dante Gabriel Rossetti. It was him and his siblings, Christina Rossetti, her poetry. It was just called the Rossettis, but it had all of his super famous paintings in there. And once again, I had this experience of walking into this room, and it was super exciting to me. I love his paintings. I've grown up with them, obsessed over them to a degree. And there was a moment when I walked around this corner. You know, you have this thing in a museum where you kind of walk around the corner, at the corner of your eye, you see a painting that you love. And you're like, oh my God, it's right there. You know, can't even. And you have to almost stop and take a breath before you walk into the room. You know, like, and I looked around the corner, I could see there was the Persephone painting. You know, where she's kind of cradling the pomegranate, kind of hunched over. And it's life size or bigger. It's a big, long, tall painting. And as I watched on the corner, though, revealed to me was like, holy shit, there's 5 different versions of this. I think of it, I see it in many, but I think of it as one painting. But then I was like, oh no, they're all familiar to me. I just guess I thought, oh, they were slightly different prints, you know, or the book or whatever I'm looking at them on, or the JPEG is like slightly different. But actually, he did the exact same painting at least like 5 times in different medium as well. One is like a more watercolory one is oils, and that was super weird. I was like, oh, okay, you know, this is like I think in his case though, maybe it wasn't so much the obsession like you'd get with Francis Bacon, probably more that someone commissioned him. So he did it once, and someone's like, hey, I'll take one of those, you know. Yeah. Like before they had the methods to be able to reproduce them as a screen print or whatever.
Yeah. I
think that's more likely, because when you look on the info card, it'll say like, this was commissioned by, you know, some rich twat somewhere. And, you know, thankfully they've got them all together now. But I feel like it's more likely that. I don't know. But yeah, pretty crazy.
Definitely, man. I guess like if you, and it's difficult, you know, but not necessarily your favorite artist, but like what would be like a couple examples of visual artists that are like most influential on your style, in your opinion?
It's weird because I feel like there's kind of 2 different sides to it, which are that there are artists who I've identified with growing up. You know, like I remember being in school and having my art teacher, you know, they'll just blast through all of this different art and art history and all of this stuff, and they can't cater to everyone's interests. And then I remember distinctly being in an A-level art class at the end of high school, and seeing my art teacher bringing up some sort of slideshow of art that she was talking about. Anyhow, amongst this comes up an Albrecht Dürer piece. I think it was like The Night on the Horse, something like that. And I remember just being like, you know, what's that meme with Leonardo DiCaprio from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he's like pointing at the screen, you know? Yeah. I was like that, I'd be like, what's that? You know, what's that fucking thing that looks, that's cool. And then it was just gone, you know, and she's on to the next thing and some nonsense that I'm not interested in. But that stuck with me. And I can't remember, I knew after that what it was. I don't know if I went and asked, or if I probably went back through the art history book. I was like, that's some cool shit. So there's things like that where I'm like, okay, that's my shit, you know, like the black pen and ink style. I guess a lot of that stuff is more like etchings and whatnot, but it's the same principle that I've come to understand. Or if it's a language that vibes with me, so that stuff. And then further on, things like the sort of 1950s sci-fi Virgil Finlay stuff like that.
Definitely.
Although with Virgil Finlay, I kind of found out about him retroactively, because a lot of people kept saying, "Oh, you're clearly influenced by Virgil Finlay with the orbs and stuff." And I'd be like, "What? Virgil who? The guy off Thunderbirds? Like, I don't know." But no, it's actually so I didn't know about him for a long time, but then since I've gone back, and like his body of work is just mind-bending. Just the quantity, probably because he also came from, it wasn't comic book, but it was like pulp horror and sci-fi comics, those little tiny books, and he would just be smashing out work like God. No, these guys must have like no social life, other interests, anything. I guess they didn't have like the internet, they didn't have travel, they didn't have, I mean, they had to travel if they wanted, but the amount of work that someone like Virgil Finlay made is just mind-bending. And then things like Mobius, another one. I don't know how much I identify with his work, but it's definitely a one that makes you. If I want something that's going to kick my ass into gear, or inspire me any day of the week, I could reach for like an image of a Mobius illustration, of which there is just seemingly infinite amounts. Like never any
You're
day
always seeing new stuff.
It's crazy. Like and that's another guy who I'm like, how did he? I mean, you can tell there's a beauty in his work that it was also done. It has that energy to it. Yeah. You can see in the pen strokes that it's like this guy worked fast and confident, and he was just like somehow the velocity to which he worked, I think, then helped him understand it better, because he's just smashing through it and he's just learning and somehow just picked up this rhythm and pace to which then somehow maintained it his whole life, because his shit just kept on going. And there's one that I've been really excited about recently. There's a book that Mobius did. So he did a bunch of things with Hodorowski, like the Eyes of the Cat. That is that the famous mini
Incal,
comic thing they did,
right?
The Incal, which I've got up right here. The Incal and a bunch of other of those. There's another spin-off from the Incal he did. The Incal's amazing. Like all of that is good. But they did a dark, erotic comic book that I've got here, Angel Claws. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's so good. This one.
Yeah, I've never seen that. It looks new too. New print.
It's done by that Humanoids guys who publish all of the Mobius and Hodorowski stuff now, and the Incal and everything. It's amazing. I won't show you the inside because it's pretty intense, erotic, and pretty shocking stuff, if I'm honest. It is. I've read it once, and I've like barely. I would encourage anyone who wants to read it to don't open it halfway through and have a flick through. Like, open it at the start and read it through, and don't ruin it.
Okay.
Because it's really like goes to some weird places. Somehow, I feel like if somehow those guys specifically, I think because by that point, I'm not sure when it was made, but I mean, definitely later life for Mobius. I think at that point they kind of just got a pass. It's like
proved himself already.
Yeah, but to the point where they could make something that insane and dark and potentially problematic, maybe. But it's them, so they're fine. They got away with it. But it's super inspiring. It's amazing. It's like some really trippy, weird shit going on, and some cool, sexy kind of noir style visual stuff in it, and it's just super weird and cool. But personally, in terms of inspiration, those examples, like kind of I always think of it being the obvious ones, like the ones that I would say, things like Harry Clark. It's another one.
Yeah.
Love, like that's something I always just identified with, like, you know, just the bold but super hyper detailed black and white line work. Harry Clark, Aubrey Beardsley, and then people like Bernie Wrightson, you know, these kind of
100%.
guys. So they're the ones that might seem kind of, someone might see the shit I'm doing, sort of reverse engineer back to be like, he's probably into these guys, you know, and they'd be right. But that's not the stuff I necessarily look to get me really psyched about making art. Like I'll usually try to look to places that are like a little weirder, or not necessarily what people might expect. The one that I would say, I'm looking for the book, I think it's here. If there was a book, one book which has been just lying here for months now, if there was one book when I'm working on especially a poster design and I just need to be like pumped and I need some inspiration, is this Tadano Yoko 100
wow,
posters.
That was cool.
So his work, I can't really. This book is just all of, like, you probably recognize this style that is kind of familiar of his super bold style of work. But there's all sorts of. There's a painting he made of the Beatles in this Jesus picture. It's incredible. But it just happens, like, he painted that picture of the Beatles, but it's like he just happens to be able to paint amazingly, but he's not even known for painting at all. Like a lot of his stuff is just collage, and it's just like crazy layouts, and look at this shit, you know, it's mental, and just and it work, like the layouts work, and you're like, I don't know how and why these things work. The colors are just incredible. Like, look at this shit.
Oh yeah,
it's wild. It's amazing. And some of them will just be like a lot of negative space with just mad ideas. Like all of this, every page you could just lose your mind, you know. Some of them are super minimal. It'll just be like a huge open space with, like, what's going on here is like Godzilla and Spaceman. And
what's cool too about
amazing.
like that approach is you know how it is, like there's some illustrators who are more like drafts people who also are illustrators, and then there's like designer illustrator combos, and like that person very much has a good design sense, and like so do you. So it makes sense that like you'd be gravitating towards that.
Thank you. It's a nice thing to hear. I did actually study graphic design rather than illustration. Not necessarily through choice. My art school didn't have an illustration course. Otherwise, I probably would have done that. But I did graphic design, and part of me is like, damn it, I wish I could have done illustration because it would have been further along or whatever. But actually, I feel that if I had not done, through doing the graphic design, I definitely learned things about design that I take for granted now, that seem obvious to me, maybe, where I'm like, every now and again I'll stop and think, oh yeah, thank God I know about how to generally about weights, you know, like how to weigh and balance something out, things about the visual hierarchy of color and weight and layout and negative space and all of those things. Just these set of rules which are not necessarily completely universal, like some I will have just adopted and figured out myself, I guess, but to have the time to think about all of those things. And I do love that too, you know, like I like doing the illustration, but I'm not like a fine artist kind of minded person where I'm like just working on a drawing and I'm like, as I said to you earlier, it's like I chuck the drawing under the bed, you know, like it's not like, hey, look at this drawing I made. I'm like, okay, now I'm going to lay it out and add color and do something else with it. And I also enjoy working with typography, but in all kinds of different ways, you know, like I always feel a bit frustrated by the idea of just searching for a typeface, you know, going on Defont or whatever and pulling some typeface off there, and just something feels a bit icky to me about that, because it's, I don't know, you can make good choices with that stuff, but then it's like, if I'd rather try and construct one myself, although I don't really quite know how. But I found one sort of workaround to make me feel better about that, about typefaces for posters, was I found this book, which also should be here somewhere. I think it's this one. I found this book in a local market for like very little. It's worth a lot of money online, I think, if you look on eBay or like booksellers and stuff. But I found it in some random garage sale that someone was doing of thrift shop stuff. But it's a book from, I think it's from like the 60s or 70s actually. But yeah, it's from 1977. But it's old Victorian typefaces, and they're all hand drawn. So they're like super raw. All drawn by hand, so they're really rough around the edges.
That's really
and I
cool.
basically, and there's a lot of really cool, really good bold ones like that, which are great for poster design. So that's actually what I used when I did that Pearl Jam poster recently. The writing, it's one of these. It's like maybe that, I don't know, like which one? That one?
I can see it. Yeah.
It's backwards to me on here. This one.
Yeah.
I think it might be that one or one similar. So basically, I scanned it in from this and pulled each letter out one at a time. And it's really low quality, you know, like even if you scan it but by the time you translated it through the filter of screen print and done all of that noodling with it, so I took each letter at a time and like a letter set thing and just stacked them all up together. And to me, it just gave it that organic edge where at least I know I haven't just like typed it in. So it made sense. Someone else drew it, but I did put a bit of physical analog work in to lift it off the page. It was been through a whole process. Some dude in Victorian times drew it. Some guy in the 70s published it in a book. Someone left it at the back of their garage for years, and then I found it and bought it off someone for £1 or something. And then, you know, it's been on a journey, and then it's ended up on that poster back there. So
yeah. And you have a far less chance of someone else, you know, using that's same font, you know.
Yeah, because if I see it somewhere else and I'm like, you know, it sucks. You know, when especially when a band uses a font for their logo and it's cool for a few years, and then suddenly you see it somewhere else and it just ruins the whole thing. You're like, oh, now it's not, like, just devalues it, doesn't it? You know.
Oh yeah, no, totally.
I think.
I'm looking at the time, and we have a lot of art to cover too. We can get to that. Is there anything else? Because ahead of this interview, we just exchanged some like notes and stuff. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on that we kind of looked at beforehand?
I'm just thinking about what stuff did we talk about? I don't not necessarily, unless there's something that you would be keen to talk of. We talked about. You mentioned about Danov Inc., which I think is a cool thing. Yeah. I haven't really talked about it.
Well, we talked just a little bit about it, but like, what prompted you to start that to begin with?
I don't really know. Do you know what? I recently, we got to like our 20th curator on there, so which is kind of a landmark to me. It's like, that's fucking cool, you know. We've had 20 different people, and each one of them is an incredibly powerful, brilliant artist, you know. So I'm like, that's 20 awesome artists that we've had curate on there. And I had a moment when I was like, I don't really even remember starting this, you know. I don't really remember what the impetus was. It was obviously just something. I woke up one night in the middle of the night probably and was like, wrote down like Danov Inc., you know, idea, some stupid idea on my phone or something. I was like, oh yeah, have this idea for this Instagram account. I don't really know where it came from, if I'm honest. But the idea was that there are lots of great Instagram accounts that curate cool art that I love and I love watching. And as much as we all want to be like, oh, Instagram, social media, whatever, truth is, we're getting a lot of cool shit from there that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of cool art, and we're discovering things. And if I'm working on a new poster project, whatever, there's definitely going to be a ton of images that I've ripped from Instagram that I've put in a little folder somewhere, and and for a little inspiration folder to get me going. But I know that we see those same ones come up over and over, those same regurgitated images that you're like, that's cool, but I've definitely seen it before. And you also even will see other artists make things where you kind of like, I kind of know the use of this same thing that I don't know. It just becomes not that there's anything wrong with any of that, but it becomes this quite small pool, just kind of constantly regurgitating the same stuff. So I started to think about this idea where I had on my bookshelves, I love pick up art books. I got a shit ton of books about various artists and art styles, and there's a ton of stuff in all of them which I'm like, I never see online anywhere, and I'm like, no one's ever scanned this picture and no one's showed it or shared it or whatever, but I'm fortunate to have it in front of me now. So the idea was that I'd get artists to share work that didn't exist on the internet. I mean, it might do somewhere, but it's not a JPEG that they've grabbed and shared. It's a picture that they've scanned in meticulously, and probably is quite annoying to have to do that, but they've scanned in or photographed and shared directly from books that they have. So that's the one aspect of it. The other aspect is that pretty consistently, every artist that I have on, at the start, they'll say something along the lines of, they'll be like, I'll do it, but I'm sure everyone knows all the stuff that I'm going to share already, because to them it's obvious, normal stuff. But then when they start sharing it, two things happen. One thing is they start sharing stuff, and all of us who are observing it, including me, are like, whoa, I've never even heard of, what is this? I've never even heard of this artist before. We all think that we have the same books on our shelves, we were exposed to the same things, and more often than not, these things will come up and we'll be like, literally never even heard of this, but now I'm going to go and check it out and check out more of this artist's work. And then the other thing that happens, which makes me extremely happy, is consistently every single artist, I assume they're being honest and true about this, at the end of their curation, they'll come back and say to me that they'll be like, man, I had such a good time doing it because I got to dive into all these books and find things I didn't even realize I had in there, revisit things that have inspired me in the past and I kind of forgot about, be reinvigorated, re-inspired, and just, had an excuse to just dive in and pull things out of the books. But it's super cool. And I think what I often think about that makes me happy is my friend Becky Clunan, who was one of the early curators of it and always champions it in a big way. And, she was a big influence on like getting up and running again, I think, after I'd left it dormant for a while. She's a big champion of the cause of that account. And she described it to me. She was like, the coolest thing about it, it's like doing a DJ set and playing all your favorite songs to all your favorite people, Just being like, check, you haven't heard this song? Like, get it on. And it's like that, a visual DJ
That's
set
really cool
stuff. Yeah,
I can totally see it too, because every time somebody posts there's always something I completely agree, something I've never seen before, and it's like, okay, there goes my bank account because I'm about to buy another art book. You know what I mean? Yeah. But then there's also like everyone rallying behind like, yeah, this person is a master, thanks for sharing. Like people are like, oh yeah, love this. So it's, like I said, like a DJ set, like a good DJ set in a lot of cases, it'll play some familiar favorites, but they're good for a reason. There's always
something, yeah. And right, this is true. And also, what I really like is when you'll have an artist on there, especially when it's an artist whose work and alignment is usually based in, say, like, there's heavy, aggressive-looking artwork, or dark stuff, whatever, something that's more akin to like a certain style, and you think, oh, they're going to only share work that's just like similar to what they make or whatever, but then they'll share, like we've had people sharing things like Maurice Sendak, like Where the Wild Things Are, these sort of things, childhood books, or like artwork from Redwall and things like that, the stuff that influenced them early on, to be like, oh, this is a definitive moment of being being in childhood and discovering a piece of art at that age that was like turned me on to all this other stuff. So I'm glad that generally the curators on there have got cool with not feeling like they have to be kind of too cool for school, always being like, no, I can only share like Virgil Finlay or something, no, I can be honest about this. It's like, I was into this, whatever, because it's all amazing shit as well. And often that's the stuff that resonates even more with people, because they're like, oh my God, I haven't even seen this since I was an 8-year-old child. And then, like, you know, and there's been a lot of Calvin and Hobbes on there recently, which has made me happy, you know?
Yeah. Great stuff, man.
Yeah.
Well, dude, let's get into showing some of the art and the stories behind it.
Cool. I might just go and grab a beverage and
yeah, go ahead.
Come right back.
Let me pop it up. All right. So the first thing, we're going to touch on plenty of like metal artist related stuff, but we thought it would be cool to go through like the process of creating the Pearl Jam poster. So we're going to start with that. Mm-hmm. This is the final result, right?
Cool. Yeah. So that's the final poster. The left-hand one being like the digital version of it, and the right-hand one being the actual physical poster, which is always interesting to see. But they did a pretty killer job of printing it, actually. It looks like spot on accurate. I think it was in-house in LA, I want to say, in California somewhere. I hope it was them. I'm pretty sure it was them, in-house California. So yeah, the as I mentioned earlier, the text all came out of that book. So yeah, some old Victorian typeface. And I had a weird thing with it. This is a good chance that I can address this just to clear my consciousness, is that you see how at the top the two A's are clearly the same? And usually that's kind of like a telltale sign that it's usually like a typed typeface, because you're like, oh, you know, it's like a giveaway when it's some, everyone will know what I'm talking about. It's like some distorted type, but then you know it's not, because it's not authentically distorted, because you see the repeated thing. So when I first put it together, I did, because it was lifted from that book and it had this natural distortion and deterioration on some of the letters, and that A was obviously repeated, and I was like, oh, I'll go back. I did it for the mock-up and did the type exactly as I wanted, and then I was like, I want to do the real one. I'll go back and I'll fix the A and make it look more natural. But I did that and it just lost something. It didn't work. And I was like, okay, in principle, this is wrong to me, and it shouldn't have that repeated one, because people are going to look at it and be like, oh, it's obviously just some typed out, distorted, deteriorated font. But I changed it and it didn't look right. It didn't work so well. And I was like, do you know what? Follow your heart. I'm going to keep it as it is, and people can think what they like. But I know it came from a pure place. But yeah, I kind of like also the 2024 at the bottom, the weird, the 2 and the 4, like they look so kind of cartoonish and weird, but I kind of like it for that reason. It's like super strange. But yeah, once again, just lifted out of that book and slammed on there. So cool. Yeah, so I think you've got the...
So we got the line art drawing.
That's it right there. That's my guy. So that's the original pen and ink drawing as it is. And so usually, in most cases, I want to draw it. I want to draw it as one piece if I can. Sometimes it'll be a component thing of multiple pieces, like the Grateful Dead stuff that I've done, where it's like a lot going on. I've drawn it as all these component parts. But ideally for me, I want to do it in one hit. So that one is a great example. It's just one solid piece, and then I would have just filled. I mean, I could have painted, I could have blacked out the background by hand, but it wasn't really worth doing on this at this point. I knew how it was going to be and that I could fill that out. So yeah, that's the original. I think, yeah, what you're seeing on the right is a photo of the drawing, and what you're seeing on the left is a straight up scan of the pen and ink artwork. But a bit about the concept for the piece. So that came from something that's always fun and interesting with gig poster design, is that you get generally a lot of freedom to be able to move your own personal art forward and experiment a lot and try out new things, and you're encouraged to really use your own voice and make it your own, which is kind of a big reason why I've kind of got into that lane for a long time. It's good for those reasons. It's kind of like relatively low stakes in a lot of ways, because you're just making something that celebrates a little moment in time, versus what we spoke about earlier with record covers being very high stakes. But you can really develop your own artwork, but you also have a little bit. It's always good to have a bit of a brief or a bit of something coming from an outside source that's not just, it's cool to be making something that you really want to make, but it's also cool to have some little something thrown in there just to start you going. So usually with gig posters, and certainly with Pearl Jam posters, it'll be something about the local area, that something speaks about the place. This is extremely common with, that's usually the go-to for gig posters. It'll be like something about the city that the show is in. So this one was on the coast. It was Ohana Festival, actually, that they were part of. They played there many times on the California coast. So I was looking into things about the area, but I already had this idea in mind. I'd recently been to Florida and seen a lot of pelicans out there and was pretty kind of captivated by them. And I took a lot of photos of them. And I was like, I wonder if they have... And I'd come home from that trip being like, I want to draw a pelican on a poster, I just had it in my mind. I was like, one day I'm going to draw a pelican on a poster. And then, so I looked into it. Turns out there are brown pelicans in this area in the coast of California, the California brown pelican. So I was like, okay, that's all I need to know. I can definitely get away with doing a pelican. I wasn't that crazy about any of the photos I'd taken of pelicans. They were okay, but there wasn't any that really stood out. And then I found a photo online, which I ultimately based this on, that I was very, just captivated by and enthralled by. It just was extremely powerful. And I looked into it and found there were two things I found out from being sucked in by this poster. One of them was I ended up on this website where I found out that this particular breed, the California brown pelican, was almost extinct quite recently, actually, because it had been on it was on the endangered list for years because some poison had got into the food chain in the 70s through whatever means, some sort of chemical from factories or something. It got into the food chain, poisoned them and it poisoned the anchovies and sardines that they live on. And I think that's right. It was poisoning them, but they didn't realize they were being poisoned until they'd be laying eggs that were brittle and they wouldn't be able to reproduce because they were just crushing their eggs. And this went on for decades until eventually they were only in like 2009, they were pulled off the endangered list because they managed to bring them back. So a cool, adversity, what you call it, a triumph over adversity, overcoming story, but also it felt kind of appropriate for the situation because I'd been on this whole journey of like health issues over the last year with my eyes and not being able to draw, and this was like one of the at the start of the year I had some issues with my eyes, had to have surgery, couldn't see for a long time really, and I had to cancel all of my work. And the one project I was the most upset about canceling was that I'd been asked to do a poster for Pearl Jam, and I ultimately couldn't do it. I had to pull out of it very reluctantly, and they very graciously at the time said, well, as soon as you're back drawing again, then let us know and we'll line you up for something. And then this was many months later when I heard back and they offered for me to do this one. So that was the first piece that I'd made back, so it felt like a cool idea to make this poster that had this story about it, about this sort of journey of kind of coming back from the brink. So I had this idea of wanting to draw this pelican sitting on top of this clutch of solid, powerful, strong eggs, and then I ended up then hitting up this guy who I didn't want to use the photo without it being licensed or credited to whoever took this brilliant photo. I found out the guy who took the photo was this guy called Jim Howard, who I looked him up, found his email address on this same website. It turns out he works for like this environmental society in California as an environmental scientist and is involved in protecting the pelicans and has been working with them for years. So I ended up in touch with him and talked about the whole thing. And it was beautiful. And he gave me his blessing to use the photo as inspiration for it, and advised me on some characteristic things about the coloration of them and answered some questions. And it was just super cool. So it's a good example of how you can be working on what is ultimately just a drawing project, but it can become something a bit deeper,
Yeah, for sure. That's what I'm thinking here and all that.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to ask about this part of.
I got a random question that
Mhm.
I mean, I'm absorbing
Hit me.
everything you said, but I gotta ask: are there pelicans in Wales? Like, was this like
No,
your
I
first time
never.
seeing pelicans in
It
Florida?
was Florida was definitely my first time seeing
That's crazy because I see them all
pelicans.
the time. You know, being in Georgia,
Right. Well,
not
I
in
was.
Atlanta, but like we go to the coastal areas quite often. So
Yeah,
I don't
I
know. It's just
went.
a foreign concept to me.
Yeah, I went to. I was in Florida for all of December, and my wife's family. She was born there, but didn't really grow up there. She kind of moved pretty early on, but she still has family out there that we stayed with and visited. Um, but her aunt, my my wife's aunt, she kept saying I was tripping out because the first day I woke up in the house in this is in St. Petersburg, and I looked out the window and there was a fucking cardinal outside. And I've obviously never seen a cardinal. Like, we don't have cardinals in Wales.
That's crazy.
This beautiful bright red bird that I've seen in pictures and books and things my whole life, and always thought it was just one of the coolest looking birds. And I was just so excited, just looking out the window in the kitchen. She's like, "You've never seen a cardinal before?" And I was like, "No, of course not," you know. But that kept happening, you know. You're seeing all the lizards running around and all these just incredible. The cardinal was the one that got me the most excited, you know. But then, yeah, sure enough, when we went down to the sort of harbor type area, seeing the pelicans all just hanging out, it's like some Jurassic Park shit. I was like super, just like Sam Neill pulling off his glasses. I loved it. I was, yeah. So yeah, that was definitely. I mean, I might have seen one in a zoo or something, but I definitely that was my first experience hanging out with pelicans, and that's super cool. Like, they come right, they're not afraid to just hang out right next to you and do their thing. Yeah.
Not at all. Do you last bird related question? What about like cranes and herons? Do you ever see
Well,
those in Wales? Because those are
we
pretty
do.
common too.
Yeah, we do. We have herons. So there's a river like right behind my house here, and we have egrets and herons. Don't have cranes, but we have egrets and herons. But usually you'll see like one heron, and at a time. I usually think, oh, there's the heron. You know, like there's always one of them. Maybe a couple of egrets once in a while, but that's kind of it. It's like pretty slim pickings. But then being out in Florida, we were on our way up to Gainesville, and we went to this one huge insane park, and it was amazing because there was like no one else there because it was a big uh, storm coming in. So everyone, we thankfully Joe's aunt, it was like soup. She was like, "We've got an hour before the storm. We can get in and out," you know. So we went to this huge park, and it was insane because it was just alligators all along the river, like just hundreds and hundreds of alligators, like right there next to you. There were but they packed into one. I've got a photo where you can see in this one snapshot, there's like 5 or 6 alligators, a pelican sitting up on this little stand here. There's a crane. There's 2 egrets. There are some black vultures. All of these animals in one. It looks like a children's book where there'll be like a page with like all the animals kind of annotated. Like, this is a bear. This is a raccoon. You know, like, but bizarrely they're all just in this one place hanging out, and in this huge swampland there'd just be cranes and pelicans, hundreds of all of them, just all hanging out in this one spot. And then in St. Pete, around the corner from Joe's aunt's house where we were living for that time, you'd walk through this neighborhood, and this one house, I've got some extraordinary photos of it, this one dude's house, I don't know what was going on, but the whole house was covered in storks and cranes and egrets, just like on an ibis as well, all over the house. And I guess they feed them. They must chuck food on the roof or something. I don't know, but this one house was just like absolutely covered in them. It's crazy. Yeah, that stuff. I'm all about it. I love it.
Yeah, in the States we call that some Florida shit.
I saw all the Florida shit. It was amazing. Yeah,
that's great. It's man.
Great.
All right, so process then.
So these bizarre looking examples are basically trying to, I don't always do this, but I like to once in a while, is to hand generate what are ultimately going to be the color screens. So what I'll do is, I've got that original illustration that you saw just now, and I'll get some tracing paper, slam that over the top, and get brush pens and fine liners, whatnot, and just harness off the areas that I want to color, and just go layer by layer. So each of these is a different piece of tracing paper that I've mapped out the areas, and you can kind of see the beak in there and some sort of stippling bits and this and that. And then it's kind of a clumsy way. I haven't quite really got to the bottom of how to do it effectively, because even if you get really thick tracing paper, when you apply the ink and then the ink dries, it kind of distorts and contorts the papers even just slightly. So then you scan it in,
the measurement's a little off,
and so it's slightly off. And I guess I need to use acetate. That's what I need to do, which is going to be, I figured it out right now. Acetate, which is going to be like not doing that.
You gotta talk through these things,
Yeah. Then the answers will come.
Yeah.
But then I suppose with the acetate, I'd need to get some sort of really permanent, appropriately permanent kind of pen, which is also really fine, which is kind of hard to come by, aren't they? Those, really fine, really permanent. But this works. It's okay. It's a little clumsy, but it works well. You can kind of see, it kind of works well enough. It just means that once you then scan it in, drop it out onto the scan of the line art or behind the scan of the line art, and there's going to be quite a bit of patching up and fixing going on, but it works well enough. And I think if you go to the next one, so here then you'll see fundamentally those different layers all combined. There's kind of like an under layer. I guess for that one, I've just kind of harnessed the whole thing, knocked out the patches that are going to be colored. So like I said, I don't always do it this way. This is just the more analog. It's kind of fun because it's just a bit more analog, and you can just to draw those color layers by hand. Just it's a bit more authenticity to it. But I don't always do it that way, and I try and generally. I did go a bit wild on this one. You can see I did a lot of kind of shading in the colors, which I usually don't do, actually. It's kind of unusual, but I think it was because I wanted this to have a feel. There's a very specific style of bird illustration or painting that you see and I saw a lot of it in Florida and took reference photos of it, and they use it to advertise all kinds of products, probably like old cigarettes or something, I don't know. But it's a certain style where it's like a black background and a super hyper colored, pelican or whatever. So I was kind of leaning a little towards that, and in those they'd be a lot more kind of painterly, so I wanted to add a few shades and things to it. So that's why I got a bit crazy with the shading on these. But generally I like to lean into the idea that if the illustration is pretty detailed, which it often is, then keep the colors pretty kind of blocky and basic. I usually have pretty strict rules on just harnessing off simple colors and having them be not ever really meeting, being harnessed by these lines. And the way I've always described it is thinking of it as if you're like painting a stained glass window, because that's what it feels like to me. You've got this sort of wireframe and you're painting behind it and patching in these color areas. And I think it can help for someone who, like so many of us, have that kind of brain that's like flying in all directions. Then it's helpful to have rules,
Definitely.
So it certainly helps me.
So let me clarify something. Is this is not digital coloring, or it is?
It is. So I'm using Photoshop for all of this.
Okay.
But the color layers that you're seeing, at least initially, are those hand-drawn pieces then just scanned in and
okay, I'm following
together.
Now. I got it.
But if I'm being completely go on to the next one if you like that, because it's part of the same process. So then I'm just adding. Also, this one I've used a shit ton of colors on this one. It's like I think they asked for something like 7 screens or less, and I was like, yeah, no problem. I'm usually I usually aim for like no more than 5, but you get to 5 pretty quickly. You think, yeah, 5 sounds like a lot of colors, but once you include your key line, and then you can. The smart thing is to use a paper color, but for this one, just something about it. I wanted to have. I think it was because I was trying to lean towards those images I'd seen that I was inspired by, of those very more painted style birds, that I wanted to have more tones in it, and I ended up it being like 8 colors, I think, and I had to be like, guys, is it cool if we, they were cool and they let me do like 8 colors, but I had to kind of ask for it, and I think I did a thing of asking for it in a way. It's like, well, if you want it to be not quite as good, that's on you, kind of thing. And they're like, no, we want it to be as good as possible. So I was like, well, if you want it to be as good as possible, it should be 8 colors. And but I stand by it. I tried to cut some corners, and it was like, it's not quite there. So, and I'm glad we went with I think, 8 colors is like the limit. You don't really want to go more than that. Otherwise, I know there's people who are like, this screen print looked like took 21 colors or something. It's like, well, cool and all, it's a cool kind of feat, but what I feel like it's going against some of the cool principles, some of the things that make screen printing cool, is working with economy of color. Like the coolest screen prints to me are not the ones where you're like, we use 21 colors. It's the ones where another artist will be like, check this out, and you're like, man, that's so colorful and cool, and they're like, 4 colors. You're like, what? No way. How did you do that? And figuring out clever tricks. Again, it's all about tricks, figuring out clever tricks, how to economically, I didn't do it this time, but economically use colors and use negative space and like put colors next to each other so they read differently. Or if you want to be cocky, you do the thing where you'll use like a 50% opacity color thing, and then you double the amount of other colors you've got, and you can go crazy with that shit, But I've done that a couple of times, but it's a bit scary. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is all stuff that I haven't done any commissions for posters, so I haven't had to think about it like this way. It's almost like, for me, I'm either doing pen and ink, black and white, kind of death metal style stuff, or painting, where I'm not thinking about, like, I'm trying to get weird color combinations. I'm not trying to think about how it prints. So every time I have like these, it's a good reminder to, like, I don't know. If I did have a commission like this, I have to think like that. So make sure I, don't do something stupid.
But honestly, the thing is, for me, those restrictions help me so much. If I was just, if it, because I came into it, and I think this has been massively helpful actually, is thinking about the thing we spoke about at the top, about the route in from doing t-shirt designs. Now, just by the very nature of them, when you're doing t-shirt designs, you have to design them for screen print. I know that's not always, you sometimes you'll send them and they'll do like get some artist at the printers to do whatever. Generally, from the ones that I was working on, and maybe because I was working a lot with kind of hardcore bands where they would be printing them themselves, or they would know a mate who printed them. I don't know. It usually, like, it's a pretty tight community where you would have like, oh yeah, we know our screen printer. He's another guy from another band who's going to print it, and he said, can it be 4 colors or whatever? Straight out the gate, the rules are applied of like, or a band. It's the t-shirt is going to cost them more. By the more colors, the more expensive the t-shirts are, and they're wanting to sell t-shirts to be able to survive on the road or whatever. So most bands would be like, can you make it work with 3 colors, but it needs to look as good as this, or it needs to, or your own personal ambition of what it wants to be. So straight out the gate, the parameters are like, okay, can you design a t-shirt that looks fucking cool, stands out against all these other t-shirts, and is only using 4 colors, and is ready to screen print. So you just have to learn how to do it. And then sometimes you'll see some where the results come back super weird, and you realize what you've done wrong, or how you haven't learned to, you learn about trapping, and you learn about all these little techniques, and then you end up working. I think I would have found, I would maybe do a t-shirt design, and the results would come back, or I'd see the t-shirt and be like, oh man, it doesn't look how I imagined because I messed up this certain thing, or the colors are not doing what I thought, or whatever the thing is. And I would maybe next time, say if it was the same band asking me, I'd say, hey, could you just put me in touch with your screen printer? And then I would ask them, like, hey, why did this come out like this? And you'd end up having a conversation, learning more about the process. So then I'd always be designing straight out from the offset with screen print in mind. And I've never changed that. So like, if I was commissioned tomorrow to do a poster for some band, and they were like, this is going to be digitally printed. You can oil paint it if you want. You could use all the colors of the rainbow. To be honest, I'd still apply those parameters to I'd still build it in the exact same way, even if it was not to be screen printed. That's the process I now know and have done for, 10 or 15 years of building layers in that way, having the set of rules, having limitation of color, economy of color, figuring out clever ways to use it. And I would do that same process even if it wasn't for screen print. That's how deep in it I am. I don't know any other way. Yeah.
That's cool, man. Thanks for sharing. And just one more time, showing the end result. So you got your lines back, and sorry, you can hear my dog groaning. I've been trying to mute. I'm just transparently for the audience. He went to the vet today, and I need to have him close by just to make sure he's not licking his paw. So I'm trying to do two things at once a little bit. He's a good boy, though. Okay. Oh, he's doing fine.
It's hard though when you can't explain to them, about the paw. You're like, man, I wish I could tell you. I wish you could understand. Don't be licking that paw.
When he's a Frenchie, so he's a grumbler. He's just loud. He's good though. All right, we got quite a bit to cover. All right, so we got Mastodon next. Cold Dark Place, really good EP. Cool. I have it on the shelf right over there.
It is a good EP, isn't it? It's cool.
Oh yeah, it's underrated.
It is underrated. I was saying to having this conversation earlier with my wife actually about I love an EP. Some of my favorite records by bands are EPs. Something about that, they kind of exist in their own little alternate universe trajectory of they're not quite being an album, and yet some of them feel as substantial as Cave In, Tides of Tomorrow. That's my favorite Cave In record, and it's 5 songs, but it takes you on a journey, So yeah, so many incredible EPs. This is one of them, and I love it because it's a Brent record. It's fun. If it's, I think that's how they kind of promoted it. I assume.
Yeah,
I think that's how it's generally regarded. It's like Brent's kind of side thing. Super, super cool. So something I wanted to mention actually is the version that you're seeing on the screen now. I actually cranked the brightness on it a little bit.
Okay.
Compared with the actual real one. Because at the time I kind of regretted how dark it was, because it's crazily dark. And I went through a period when I was in my old studio. I don't know if it's a combination of two things. One of them was, I think, my screen on my computer. Maybe I worked in the dark a lot and the screen was really bright. So things looked perfectly bright to me. I'd be like, yeah, that looks great. And then I'd send it off. And then when I'd see it back in some other environment, I'd be like, holy shit, this is so dark. And a lot of my posters, a bunch of posters I made over a period where when I see them now, I'm like, they're so crazily dark, but I didn't realize at the time. And I think another part of it is that I was also do a thing of kind of like a nervous feeling about, I'd make my stuff really dark so that people couldn't quite see it, Be like that fear of if they, it's like making a record and making the guitars really distorted, because it's if they can really hear what I'm playing, they might think it sucks,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So it's almost like covering. I think I hid behind that a bit, making things real dark. And with this one, it was a shit ton of work, put a lot of work into it. And then when I delivered it, I felt a little bit like I just made it a little too dark. So for this example, I figured, being as we were talking about it, I just opened the file up and just brightened it just a little, 10% or something, just a little bit, but just so you can see it a bit clearer, to be honest. But there's a lot of stuff in here. Most people, I know this. Even at this point, I was under no illusion that most people will see a record cover as a little 1-inch square postage stamp on Spotify. I will in most cases with other people's records, So I'm under no illusion about that, and for that reason, I always do the thing of saying, hey, it has to work on both levels. It could ideally work as a 12-inch or this, 12-inch record or whatever, but it should also work as a little 1-inch postage stamp. So with this, I guess the explanation of that would be, if you see this tiny on Spotify, at least even the moon and the shape of the house kind of looks like a thing, it makes sense, but you're never going to see the detail in it. But hopefully some people would own, a larger format and be able to see it. But to be honest, even the CD version of it, what I'm getting towards is a big influence on this artwork. I was getting super into Ivan Bilibin, who is a Russian artist who did a lot of the old Russian folklore fairy tales, like Vasilisa the Beautiful and all these Baba Yaga and all of that stuff. I got super into that. And he did a lot of work where he would make these intricate borders around each piece, which had little mushrooms and creatures and owls and stuff hidden in them. And I think I'd sent those to Brent and was like, hey, this is the shit I'm really... Brent, the idea for the whole... Everything about this cover was Brent's idea. Like, he described it it's got to be this old dude in this house in the deep dark woods. It was quite poetic how he described it. And then these trees that look like hands. So if you look at the two trees on either side, they're kind of clawed hands. So it's like these trees that are grown up into hands around it. And he described the whole thing, and he was insistent on like it needs to be blue or like a cold gray blue color. And I kept sending him ones and he was like, no, it needs to be more blue. Like he had such a clear vision for it. But then I'd said to him, I was like, hey, I got this idea. What if we have a border around it, like this Ivan Bilibin kind of thing, and we'll have a little story in there of these little woodland creatures? And he loved it. And he was like, yeah, we'll have, and he kind of listed a bunch of creatures we could put in there. So you definitely can't see it on the CD at all, but you can maybe see it on, depending on how big your screen is if you're looking at this. But the whole edge of it is like all these little woodland creatures in the border running around, and there's like so much stuff hidden in it that no one would really ever know. And I think at the top as well, the logo, because I always feel that a cool thing with Mastodon that obviously Paul Romano pioneered was that for each record the logo and the filigree and things. Yeah, he'd have like a little icon for each that was the little remission flamey kind of one, and they're kind of those little earth signs almost, leviathans, that little kind of whale's tail kind of shell looking thing. So he'd have like a different logo, but also different sort of filigree around it. So I was thinking, well, this is not part of that album canon, but it still should have its own identity in terms of how the logo sits. But I wanted to really strip it back and make it really simple. So the little, I don't know what you call them, these little folk art kind of little emblems on each side, that was also an Ivan Bilibin thing I kind of ripped from just things that he would use, these little folk art motifs. And they're so simple, but they do a lot, I think, But something nice about that, I thought, whereas before the ones that Paul had done had that very lavish gold, filigree thing going on. And then for this, I was just because of the nature of it, because it's this lonely, humble guy, and it's coming from this more folk kind of folklore place. It felt more appropriate to have this folk art, little primitive symbols on there. So that's kind of where that came from. But yeah, I'm pretty proud of the piece overall. I just wish I made it a bit brighter on the original one. But as you can see, so on the left, that's the original illustration, and it's all drawn with walnut ink, I think, which is lovely stuff. It's like I used to get it from someone on like Etsy or something, I think, who makes it themselves, and each one you'd know, because it was all like homemade. You'd unscrew the top and it just smelled like bin juice, just like this stinking. That's how you know it's good. It's like this real raw, smelly walnut ink, but it's good stuff because you can, when you use it, depending on how much it's slightly translucent, and as you build it up, you can make it goes from a sepia to a black, and it just behaves in interesting ways. Like even across this page, even though it's all the same ink, you can see there are bits that look black, bits that look brown. So there's like a little, it's not the same as just using a straight up like technical pen or whatever, you know, it's like a lot of different tones in there. So I thought that would be cool to, it fed a bit more into the sort of folklore, ancient methods of drawing. And so this was just like a dip pen and a brush. And I just going a bit crazy with kind of like actually like a lot of this is the kind of drawing where I only planned it very loosely, you know. Most of it is just drawn organically off the cuff, you know, which is
That's
a super
pretty cool.
fun. It's kind of a dangerous way to work sometimes.
Yeah.
It can go horribly wrong. But for something like this, it makes sense because you're just following those organic pathways. You know, there's a rough layout to it. I'm kind of just drawing out roughly where the house is going to go, and where those kind of hand shapes are going to then turn into trees. But for the most part, I'm just like staying up all night, just getting in a zone and just like going for it with the dip pen. I don't always do it that way, although generally I don't like with figures. So like the figure of the old dude, I think I just kind of posed for that myself in my backyard, had someone take a photo, and then got some old dude, you know, some reference to some old dude's face and kind of used that. But if it's not something that demands that level of reference, then generally I don't really do much planning. I don't really do that much concept sketching. I don't really do that stuff of drawing, you know. Like most other artists in my circles are the opposite. They'll do like immaculate pencil renditions and then go in and do the pen one. I don't know why, but for me, I think it's an impatience of being like, I'm already going to spend a long time on this, and I don't want to go in twice. I'll be bored, you know. So I'd rather just go in cold and just get straight to the. I like the danger of it a little bit. Maybe I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it makes sense for something like this where it is feeding off this organic kind of intention.
Yeah, and thanks for breaking that all down. I guess one last question on this one is it pretty unique to be working just with Brent the whole time? Because in a lot of cases, like, do they kind of like alternate, you know, points of contact?
Yeah. So my dealings with those guys was always like, it's been an interesting journey because I ended up creating many pieces for them, but going back to long before I worked with them, they were like my favorite band in the world. You know, I was just like absolute dream clients, and I had the Paul Romano Leviathan art in my living room. It was the sort of centerpiece, you know, and definitely they were a band who, and Paul's work especially, just blew the doors open on making painted and illustrated art really important in heavy music again after many years in the, you know, realms of Photoshop kind of
the weird
photo
PlayStation
layered shit
stuff,
you know. Yeah, which was a lot going on of that when I was in art school, unfortunately, and it was a very confusing time. But but yeah, so Paul Romano, like his artwork, the whole aesthetic, everything just spoke to me on every level. I just loved Remission, loved Leviathan, loved everything about the sound and the artwork, the imagery, the folklore stuff. Everything about it was just perfect. And then weirdly, you know, there's this thing where you find Brent's a total lunatic, obviously, but I love him, and he's one of those guys where you're kind of like, I know this guy is this huge hero of mine who plays in this fucking awesome band or whatever, but deep down in my heart, I feel like if we lived in the same town, we'd definitely hang out. Or, you know, like there's a connection there that I could
He's
feel
very
on
connected
some level.
To the Atlanta local scene, man. Like,
none
of them act like divas. They're at shows all the time. I see them.
Yeah, I always see that. Yeah, he'll just rock up and he's always out checking out live music on all levels and just like get involved in stuff. Yeah, and I always felt that with Brent, and then I was like, oh, I don't know who I am. I'm just some fun dude out in the Wales and the hills or whatever. But I remember I don't know, we just started connecting on like Instagram and stuff. I think he saw some pictures I posted of things in my house. Like it wasn't even art. It was just like a banjo hanging on the wall and just some like aesthetic things. And he sent me a message being like, hey dude, are you in my house? was like, what? And he was like, your house looks the same as my house. Like, we got the same color walls and the banjo hanging up here and a skull up here and this stuff. And I think I'd drawn a picture of him at some point, and then he was like into that, and then I don't know. We just started. So Brent, that was the first point of contact. Just like usual stuff of just like started just chatting online about stuff and just vibing on the same stuff. And but then it was Bran who reached out to me and asked me about. Bran's like the businessman of that band in the best possible way of just like making shit happen, curating stuff,
totally.
So he'd hit me up and been like, "Hey, we're going on tour. Would you like to?" I don't know if he even knew that I had been chatting to Brent or whatever. I don't know if he just seen the art or whatnot. But so I started doing T-shirt designs for them, which was super cool. And initially, it was mental because it was such an important band for me. Like the first piece I made, I was just like, I need to put everything into this piece. I need to show them that I know what this band is. That sort of mentality. Way too much. Like I should have just been like, I've learned over time, T-shirts especially need to be just something bold and simple, really. The best T-shirts that I would want to wear need to, something just bold and simple. And this one though, I was like, I'm going to hide all of these things in there just to show them that I know what this band's about and I know all of their records. I'm going to represent every record in this T-shirt, all this nonsense. But so I went a bit overboard, but yeah, anyhow, when it came to this record, I'd worked with Bran on all the T-shirt designs. He was always kind of overseeing them. Was always super, super cool to work with, and it still is. Just always fucking great. Always just on it. Always cool ideas too. And but then weirdly, this one was just mental because. So I didn't really know Brent at the time. I'd kind of been vaguely chatted to him a little bit, but didn't know him like I do now. But weirdly, I had an email showed up in my Hotmail account. I was like, it's like an old weird email account that I don't use. I only have to keep it going because when you sign up to eBay or something and your receipts go there, so it's like, keep this stupid account. Some old Hotmail account that I don't use for any correspondence, only for receipts and stuff. And I'd gone in to check something. There was an email from Brent in there. I was like, how did this guy even? Who knows?
Hilarious.
How do you even get my thing? And there was like the email was this very weird, strangely articulated a message that I was like, I think he's asking me to make a record cover for him, but I don't quite know. It all makes sense to me now, but anyhow, there was a lot of back and forth, and then I did so many weird concept versions of it, and there was I felt quite flattered. I did an interview with Brent about the artwork for Revolver magazine, and he kind of was like he never uses email, and like the fact I even got him to use email to correspond about the long journey we went on with figuring out this artwork, I was like, okay, yeah, he put the work into but to art direct it, but it was a lot.
That's awesome. All right, let's okay, well, just maybe just slightly faster because we got a lot to cover, but
cool. So this one's an easy one to go through because it's basically this is a great example of Bran being like straight to the point. He hit me up and was like, we're going to put out this single called Fallen Torches, and here's the idea. He sent me an image that he grabbed off the internet somewhere of just some image of kind of a torch on its side, flames coming off it, to kind of just what the center of this is like, very simple. And he was like, this is basically what I want. Could you draw this? So it was cool because like straight out the bag, I knew exactly what he wanted, and it was a cool idea. So I drew it, but I made up all of, as you can see. So the image on the right is clayboard. So I'm drawing on it in pen and then scratching into it to reveal the white. And this was just around the time I started experimenting with clayboard, and it's a cool, weird. Anyone who's tuning in who hasn't used one, it's a weird thing. I think I was first introduced to them by Daniel Danger. He uses them a lot. It's a weird thing. I think because also they're not that really very well known in the UK. People don't really use them so much, but I managed to get some sent over. But yeah, it's basically like a whiteboard. You can draw in there in black, and then you can scratch it in like a scraper board thing to reveal the white and kind of keep working back into it. So that's how I did this. So I basically just drew in a block of black. And then these images, so the version that you're seeing here, the version that Bran sent me was a very basic torch. Didn't really have it much going on. It was just like a plain kind of thing. I think the top part maybe I took from it where the flames are, but the body of it was very simple. So I went to, it's another great book actually I can show you, another go-to that I recommend. The Encyclopedia of Patterns and Motifs by Dorothy Bosomworth. And it's great, and I love her name. It's great, isn't it? It makes me happy all the time. So this book, I've seen this book in many a thrift store. It's quite easy to find, and there's an accompanying one which is about like logos and typeface or something. I don't know, but this one is amazing, and it's basically just page after page. It goes through every part of the world and patterns and motifs of Europe and Asia and all this stuff. So I went through there and I found these kind of stone carved gargoyle type figures and things, and that's what I based those on, was from that book. And then I think the snaky bit background, I kind of just made that up. And then I put on there's the little remission emblem that we spoke about. I've kind of put that on halfway down. You can see it kind of carved into it. Anyhow, with this, I did it. This has happened a few times where I have made, it's happened more than once when I made a piece of artwork for Mastodon, which has ended up being a record cover, but it wasn't initially supposed to. So this ended up being the cover for, you can see on this it says Fallen Torches, but
like the rarities, right?
Yeah, so it became the medium rarities album, compilation album of cover, which I was kind of glad, because if they'd asked me, if I knew I was making it for that, I probably would have just gone crazy trying to be way too ambitious with it, maybe, or I don't know. So it was kind of, it served me well to have something which I thought was more low stakes, of him being like, oh yeah, we're just going to put this single out, probably just a digital single. Don't worry too much about it. Here's the thing, just draw this thing. And as it turned out, it ended up being this quite substantial record. But I like it for that reason. I'm so glad, because I would have been like, no guys, I got some crazy, crazy idea. But it was fun. The fun thing about this was that I got to not only use, I did the clayboard illustration, which then I obviously have kind of colorized and painted, did some sort of, I don't even know, can't remember how I did it, some sort of digital painting type situation. But then behind it, I've got the marbling patterns, which I also did by hand. I went on some crazy, I had a crazy period where I was just creating a lot of paper marbling. I just got super into it. I've always wanted to try it. And over the course of probably just a week, I just made a shit ton of paper marbling. Like my whole house was just full of them, all like hanging up, drying all over the house. And then I piled them all together, found the best ones, scanned them all in. And I've never done it again since. I just did it one time, but made a ton of them. And then when I was looking for a cool background, I used it on a few pieces then after that. These paper marbling pieces. So I'd pull one out that I really liked, scan it in, break it up into sections. So that's what that background is. So like handmade paper marbling. And then the gold stuff around the edge is something, I have so much fun doing this. I don't even know where I begin. I probably take some stuff, also ideas from that book, but all of this is just shit I made up, just weird. And this is obviously all done digitally on Photoshop, but like it very, very simply. I'm literally just harnessing very, very simple geometric shapes and then twisting them around and playing with them, and definitely going back to the Ivan Bilibin book and pulling ideas from there. But it's all stuff I've made up myself, but it's just like just really simple geometric shapes and then playing with them. The idea behind it, I've got all of this like stupidly pretentious ideas about it being some weird, I like the idea that it looks both kind of ancient, like it could be some ancient hieroglyphics that you found inside a pyramid, or it could be some futuristic language that you find on a flying saucer, or it could be like a circuit board of a computer. It kind of feels like all of those things slightly, and it's mysterious and weird. And then I got kind of interested in taking some of those symbols, and there's posters I've done for Mastodon since where I've revisited it and added new symbols to it and fleshed those out. But then I had other sneaky things where, like, there's a Foo Fighters poster with a space astronaut character in it, and I put one of the symbols on the spacesuits, and I'm like, oh my god, they live in a shared universe. It's like just fun stuff to just mess around with and just build. But it's super fun because I can go back and kind of, there was a period where I go back and pull these little symbols out and reuse them, and yeah. fun stuff.
Had you like played around with Clayboard before this piece?
I don't know which order I did it. This was definitely one of the earlier ones that I used it for, but I've used it for a few of them. The Dylan Carlson portrait I did was done on Clayboard. Not many, only a few. I really like it, but I'm kind of, I don't know. I love it actually. It's really super fun. It's so rewarding and can be strangely economical. Like you can create a lot of by working in the negative. You can just build forms very quickly, and but it feels weird. There's something about, I don't know. Maybe it's just this.
Well, you're scratching. That might be kind of a weird feeling.
Yeah, something about pen and paper just feels so like an old pair of slippers. It's like this homely kind of familiarity to it, and that feels like, oh, this is cool, but it's not quite my thing. It's like playing a guitar, and like an old guitar that you love, and it's just felt so normal, and then someone giving you a bass guitar and be like, this is cool for a bit, and then you're like, I kind of want to go back to that.
I know what you mean. I always loved the look of Clayboard, but I imagine I'd have a similar feeling because like there is, being comfortable while you're working is very important, but at the same time, like we're talking about like expanding, trying new things, that's also very important too. So you probably learned some lessons from this that you can even use in pen and ink. Yeah,
actually, the one that I drew entirely on Clayboard, which is a way better example. I didn't even send you. I don't know why I completely didn't think to send this artwork over to you. Was the Killswitch Engage artwork?
The atonement, right?
Yeah,
you just put prints up for it. Let's give you a little plug.
See,
you have prints for sale.
That's why I should have put this one up there. But go and find it. It's and so the print that I put up of that atonement artwork is fundamentally the original drawing. It's like it's printed on like a tan kind of colored paper, but what you're seeing in that print is literally the straight keyline drawing, which I did draw on Clayboard. So it's like a lot of it is drawn in the way I would normally draw, but then some of it I'm blocking bits out and carving into them to pick out highlights and do it that way, like what you're seeing here. But that one worked out. Like that, I haven't really done another piece as ambitious as that, I suppose, in full that has worked out as like a solid finished piece. But that one did, and I'm excited by, even though it looks very binary, black and white. There's a range of styles on that piece, where some bits I've done kind of scratched into the Clayboard, some bits I've drawn it positive or negative, and that's fun. That's fun to me. Like I like that. I like to see that variation in a piece.
Do you ever prefer just like the raw black and white versions of your pieces versus like the colorized, ones that end up being printed and used?
I do. Yeah, I definitely do, and I think there's something. It's a confusing one though, because I think if I was outside of it, like when it's your own thing, it's almost that thing as well where I feel like I need that color and I need these other things to make it kind of take it over the line and to prove that it's a real substantial, fulfilled piece. But the reality is, for me, the things that I like the most out of other peers in my circles of artists is like the original line work, always more than the color. I'm always like, or like Virgil Finlay. He did tons of color art, which is cool, but it's like the black and white line work. Same with Mobius or anyone. It's like the black and white line was the coolest shit, of course. Well, to me, it is at least. And if I was outside of this, I would feel that way about my own stuff. But when it's your own, you always, I don't know, there's a little bit of that feeling, or you want to, kind of like what I alluded to earlier, you want to hide behind a bit of that pageantry of all the colors and stuff. But but yeah, I think deep down I do prefer just the line work, and I kind of wish that I have done it a bit actually with prints, where I went back and revisited a few older pieces and did just like keyline art versions of them, which is also why I did it with the Killswitch one, because the original print I did of it was like a crazy giant. It was ridiculous. It was like that big, full color digital print actually. And it was cool, but it was like insane. It's like, who has the room in their home for that print? It's like ridiculous. but I'd always wanted to do just one of just the straight key line of it. And we did one. They did a few other like sort of test prints, and there was one I wish they were like this one. Actually, it was just a kind of gray paper, like a dark charcoal gray, and it looked super cool. And it's almost like the best way if all of them were just printed key line on gray paper. It's great.
Yeah. Let's keep it going. We got so Cave In, and we had the final result on the left here, and then in the different formats, and we have quite a bit of like in process shots as well.
Yeah. Well, this one is. I know. Yeah. That this is one which I think I mentioned you before. Is like we could do a whole episode of talking about this, just this whole one. But I'll try and rip through some cliff notes about it. Is that
okay.
It this whole project was like a 2 year or 3 year long trajectory of it happening, but it ended up happening in this insanely beautiful way, which is that whenever 2019, something like that, I got asked to do. I don't know if it was Brodsky hit me up about it probably, or Nate, probably Brodsky, about doing. One asked if I would do a poster. They were doing 2 nights at Vitus in Brooklyn, and asked if I would do a poster for it. And obviously, I've loved Cave In since way back, and I was like super pumped about it. And I designed this poster, and it was going to be this sort of. I don't know what I had in mind. It was going to be something that you could kind of split in half somehow. I had some weird concept to it, but fundamentally, this was the concept for the poster for these St. Vitus shows of the Saturn. It was because I'd read this thing from some old sci-fi book or old astrology book about how if Saturn was sitting in a body of water large enough to hold it, it would float. And I was like, that's fucking cool. Just a weird idea. They were like, technically, if there was a body of water large enough to accommodate it, Saturn would float. So I was like, well, what would that look like? So I drew this. Like I said, I love like the Ties of Tomorrow, and I love all the old like sci-fi kind of cave-in vibes and aesthetic, and them dipping into that sort of weird sci-fi world. So so I conjured up this, and I drew this mock-up of it and sent it over to them, and then got the go ahead, and then started working on the pen and ink artwork. And I was about halfway through drawing it, and I'd been sending it back and forth to them, and they were hyped about it. And then the shows got cancelled because of COVID, so those shows never happened, and I'd already started the actual line work for it. So then it was Nate who was like, he said some cool. Nate's obviously the fucking coolest guy in the world, and he was like, he was he basically alluded to the fact, he was like, I kind of think this is too cool to put on a poster, and I think it should be a record cover. It was his idea, basically. He was like, this should be the record cover. I think he kind of said it to me. Nate said it to me, and I was kind of like, cool, I assume you're kind of joking, or it's just an off-the-hand remark, but if that ever happens down the line, that'd be fucking great. He was like, I think this should be the next Cave-In record cover. So it's like, okay, didn't think much more of it. And then a little while later, I think he got back in touch and was, or no, it might have been Stephen at that point, got back in touch, and he was like, we were actually serious about that. We do genuinely think it should be the next Cave-In record cover, but we haven't written the record yet. And Brodsky asked me to send. This is the cool part of it. Brodsky asked me to send him the artwork that I made, which was the line work of this, not colored, and he printed it out it will be this one. He printed it out and had it on the wall in the studio when they were writing the record, and said seeing the artwork gave them the inspiration to start going with writing the new music. So weirdly, it's an extremely unusual situation where the record cover, or at least a version of it, a kind of premature version of it, started to influence the music, and then in turn he was then sending me back demos or versions of the music that they had as the songs were coming together. And then I started working on this, and so there was this weird sort of leapfrogging of influence. So being like, hey, I made this piece of art, which was the launching point to start him writing these songs, which then became very kind of sci-fi and space orientated. And then he'd send them back to me when they completed them, and then I was listening to them whilst I started to figure out, okay, what colors would I use? How does this feel? And think about all the other aspects of the layout and all this stuff. So I think quite an unusual process for creating record art. And
awesome, man. I had no idea. I was listening to this earlier today. Such a good album, man.
It's amazing. It's
amazing
so good.
Production, amazing songwriting, just catchy, like really cool, man.
Yeah, it's like what we were sharing about like that Jesus Lizard thing earlier. It's like this might be the best thing they ever made. It's just like an incredible record, and it feels so straight out the gate. Feels like a classic album. It has that confidence about it, and just like you say, it's just the choruses, the catchiness of it, but the heaviness of it, and the riffs and the whole deal. It's the structure as an album. It feels just like, yeah, this is fucking solid. I think you get to points where you're like, no one writes records like this anymore. No one makes, you can get cynical about it and be like, yeah, no one can make like a classic good album again like they did in the 90s, and yeah, I think kind of surprised everyone in a really beautiful way. It's extremely cool. So what you can see on the left is the original pen and ink drawing, and I used like I said, I like making weird things happen where the satin bit is like kind of quite realistic, I guess, and but then we've got those weird blobby orbs and weird bits that look like muscle fibers, and yeah, just leaning into that, making all these weird areas of texture. And up on the top left there's this marbling thing, which I kind of learnt from doing the paper marbling, then tried to redraw that by hand and learn how does the ink behave to make that weird gloopy paper marbling patterns and kind of draw that. And then the C at the bottom is mostly done with brush strokes. So I'm using the same ink, but just getting a brush on the go and using some white paint on there as well on tops of the waves and things. And I think for a long time I'd always be really locked into, like, I like applying rules to things. It helps me. But there was a point when I've let go of it a little bit and been like, hey, I can use whatever different pens within one piece, also to keep it interesting for myself, to be like, hey, I'm just going to reach for a paintbrush now and get that involved. And I'm still operating with the binary parameters of black and white, but trying to really mix it up. And so now if people are like, what pen did you use to draw this? It's like, I don't really remember, but I probably used a dip pen, a Rotring, a Micron, some brushes, a few different inks, and yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do that. I like it. Keeps it interesting and just varying it up and not just having too much of a slog of doing the same thing over and over.
Definitely.
The other thing with this packaging, you can see the back. So that's like the back cover of the vinyl sitting next to it there. And this internal stuff. So Stephen from Cave-In, when we started talking about working on the record in the early days of it, I was working on the cover then already, but he said, hey, if you want, I've got a friend of his, a longtime friend, this guy Nick Sherman, who lives in Brooklyn. They've known each other for years, but he's like, oh, Nick creates typography, and he's like really good with type and design, but very much type-based design. He's like, if you're keen, I can introduce you guys. Maybe he can work on the layout and the typography. I was like, fucking great. Like, I could do it, but it's gonna, if he's doing it, we can work together. It'll free me up to make more art for the inlays and things like that. So that's what we did. So I worked with Nick, who we just got on famously, and we just have Zoom calls all the time. And we started going into these. We wanted it to look like a weird old kind of science manual from the 70s kind of thing, and he had some that we were both like, check out this new one I found, like some weird old science manuals we would find it on eBay and things like that. Stuff that's sort of aimed at and things that are often aimed at kids, like we had mail order things about the moon and stuff, but the design is so fucking cool on them, and there's this lots of Helvetica in there and just like cool ideas. And they did always a lot where they just have some giant, like what you see here, the way we'd seen it in some of these old manuals where they'll just go crazy on the text and have this huge, like 30-point typeface slammed in there. And I'd said to Nick early on, I was like, can we just have the title like kind of as big as you can go, on the first page, and see if they'll sign off on it, because we think it's cool, And the same with the numbering, he kind of took inspiration from those old manuals, and so we've just got this giant, like, it's pretty weird, we got these like giant numbering on there, and then we tried out tons of different fonts, and then fundamentally, I mean, it was going to be, it's a lyric book, but we wanted to make it look like some strange science manual. So I wanted to create just had a lot of fun and be really free with it, and created a lot of weird little space diagrams. I had this weird old book, I think is also here somewhere, this old book called like the Atlas of the Planets, this one. And it's just like some weird book that I picked up that you can see. I've still got all these. This is from the cave and stuff. I've got all these markers in there still, but it's just like cool, weird, like lots of these sort of diagrams. And I copied a ton of ideas from this, of those strange, like,
cool textures and stuff,
Yeah, but a lot about there were things that are not my style normally at all, but were super fun to fuck around with. They're like diagrams of like the trajectory of like this stuff, like a planet orbiting around,
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of took those and redrew my own versions of them, of these weird, and yeah, you can see a bunch of them here. And I think actually Steve, the one that's in the top middle there, Stephen got it tattooed on his arm now, which is super cool.
Oh, that's rad.
Yeah. So they're all fictional, bizarro, like diagrams that just. The idea was that I draw all these weird diagrams, and then I gave them. I didn't want to do the obvious thing of being like, there are titles in there, like floating skulls. I wasn't like, I'm gonna draw some. Oh yeah, I'll draw some floating skulls. I didn't want to do that. I didn't really want to be constricted by having to think like, what does this song mean if I make it into this space. I kind of just wanted to be more fun than that, and weird. And I don't feel that's doing a disservice to the brilliance of the songwriting and the lyric writing, because I feel like Cave-In they have that place of fun and playing around with different aesthetics and styles. I think it makes sense for me in terms of their language. So what I did was I created all of these different kinds of little mini planets and diagrams and all these crazy things, and a lot of them were drawn in negative as well. Actually, I drew them and then inverted them. So everything you're seeing here is I drew it as the opposite. But then I sent them to Nick, and I said to him, so he was laying it out, and I was like, I'm not going to tell you which one goes with which song. So you just do whatever feels right to you, Because if I start thinking about it, I'll go crazy, And I didn't make them inspired by the songs as much, I was listening to the songs and making the art, but I wasn't thinking about pairing them. So that was the way we did it. I sent them to him, and I was like, if maybe subconsciously I had an idea maybe about what that I would have done, and he did it totally differently, which was delightful to me, So yeah, I sent him like 20 different drawings and was like, yeah, put them through however you see fit. And then we did the back. I think the main Heavy Pendulum cover you can see there. And so this is for the vinyls. It's like a 12-inch booklet. On the back, I don't know if it's in this photo set, but I just redrew the little Cave-In satellite as like a little stippled image. So the back middle of that whole booklet is just this empty spacescape with this little lone satellite, tiny, just like floating through it, So yeah, there's so much in that packaging. It's like the even the labels on the records of more drawings again of just like these weird like planets and like trajectories of the satellite. And yeah, probably one of the most, I think, out of any record. A lot of records I've just done the covers for, and this is one of the few that I've done the whole full, with Nick's help, and really went all in on it. And I feel really proud of the final thing. I kind of forget about it sometimes, and then I'll be like, we put a lot of work into that. As a fully realized piece, making, and at a time when people are not necessarily always buying physical media, then make it something that if someone goes out and buys this record, they're going to come home and find some cool shit inside it. So the other image that you just went on to with painting, basically, I got some crazy idea that I knew how to paint, and I don't really. And I colored and painted by hand the original pen and ink drawing, and in the end, hated it. So this is what you're seeing here. The one on the left is the original pen and ink. As I've started painting it, and I've got kind of excited and be like, this is going pretty well. I think I know how to paint. And then in the middle, you can see when it's all gone awry. On the right, I'm probably very excited, painting some gold ink on there, being like, this is fucking cool. I'm using gold ink on the Rings of Saturn. In the middle, it's kind of gone a bit wrong. Like the sea looks kind of cool. The gold rings look kind of shocking. And then there's a kind of a mess in the middle. Basically, I just ended up going over and over it until I'd lost most of the detail. And in the end, I abandoned it. And thankfully, I still had the key line scanned in before I started painting on it. So what you see is the final one is not the hand painted one. It's the final one that was used. I digitally painted.
Do you still have the original then that you, in your words, botched?
Yeah, I do. It's somewhere, but it's just like
it's a reminder.
Thomas Hooper has been trying to get it off me. He's like, he really likes it. He's like, what are you talking about? It's really cool. Yeah. And he keeps saying to me, "You're gonna bring that painting down for me." And I'm like, I don't know where. It is true. I don't know where it is, but I haven't made much effort to find it. But it's somewhere.
What part of the UK is he in?
He's in now. He's in Lewes, which is like near Brighton. Okay. It's kind of between Brighton and London, or closer to Brighton, but it's between Brighton and London.
He's come to the States a couple of times to do some tattooing and stuff, which is cool. You know, people doing different residencies.
He lived in the States for quite a while because he was in the UK working in Frith Street in London, grew up in Hastings. But then he worked in New York for a long time and then worked in Austin in Rock of Ages for a long time too. So he was out there for quite a few years in New York and
Rock of Ages is one of the best tattoo shops in the world, in my opinion. Yeah. Love that place.
It's great. Well, Steve Byrne, who works there,
He's British, right?
I used to go up to Leeds and down to Frith Street to see him. He did most of my early, like, all my forearms. Most of the tattoos on my arms was Steve tattoos. And then Thomas did these moths in Rock of Ages, actually, when I was out there. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I got some work by Frank William, who used to work at Smith Street, New York, and then he moved to Austin. Just really good tattooer. All right, Metallica.
Cool. So I think the Cthulhu one, I think, was the second piece I made for them. I think the first one was that Phantom Lord piece, and then the Cthulhu one, which, I went a bit nuts on detail on that one, but pretty proud of it. I would never do it again. It's one of those. It's like, man, what were you thinking? Absolute maniac. But no, it was super fun to work on and just real crazy and just there's something. I mean, obviously it's Metallica, but it's like there's something cool about Metallica. In fact, I have a perfect little story about this, which is that I was going to say the cool thing about creating something for Metallica is that I want to create a kind of evil but fun, kind of fucked up sort of, I don't know, something that like two things. One thing, my friend Oliver Barrett, brilliant artist, he when he saw that one, something made me very happy. He was like, that's the kind of thing that if I was a teenager, especially with the logo style, he was like, I'd try and like scratch that into my school desk and be like, fuck yeah. And I was like, that means I've achieved what I set out to achieve, like if that's how it makes you feel. But something funny about that Cthulhu was that, which links into Cave-In, and I've told Brodsky this long before I knew Brodsky. There was a magazine article I read, I think in like Rock Sound magazine in the UK maybe, with Brodsky, and they asked him about he was talking about record cover art, and he was talking about Ride the Lightning, and he was saying, they were like, why, he was talking about why he loved that record and why he loved the record art, and he said he loved the record art because it terrified him, and he remembers going into the record store and seeing the Ride the Lightning cover and just being so afraid of it and being like, this is some scary shit, and I read that, and then years later, when I was asked to make stuff for Metallica, I was it was the second one really, that the one with the moth kind of skull, moth into flame thing. I was trying to find some inspiration, or trying to find a launching point, like a guiding light of like, what am I trying to achieve here? And I thought back to this article from years ago that I read with Brodsky, where he talked about Ride the Lightning, talked about being a teenager and being like, oh, this is some terrifying shit and I love it. So I was like, that's what I need to achieve. I need to draw something that feels like how that felt to a young Stephen Brodsky. That was just my way of like figuring out a pathway through. So that was on my mind when I was drawing that moth skull thing. I was like, I want it to look scary. That's why it's kind of lit from below, like some horror shit. I was like, yeah, just drawing it, being like, yeah, I want to make this scary. I want this to be something that would terrify a young Stephen Brodsky. So I did it. Didn't think anything much more of it. And then years later, when the T-shirt came out, I saw Brodsky wearing the T-shirt on stage.
Nice. And
then we ended up meeting out in Roburn Festival, and he was wearing the T-shirt. And I don't know if we'd been in touch before that or whatnot, but our connection was like, oh yeah, you're the guy who, you're the guy who drew this T-shirt or whatever. But I got to tell him that story then, and I was like, well, weirdly, I was so psyched to see that you picked that T-shirt out and wore it, and it was like a perfect full circle, because I was like, because bizarrely you kind of inspired it by this old interview you did about Ride the Lightning and why you liked it. But he said to me, he was like, yeah, well, actually, I saw this T-shirt and it was the first Metallica T-shirt I'd seen in a long time that I was like, fuck yeah, this makes me feel that certain way. I was like, well, there it is. That's because it was made for you, It was made with your appreciation of Metallica in mind. So yeah, beautiful little full circle.
You guys have like this star-crossed connection, man.
Yeah,
you and Stephen cool, Brodsky, apparently.
Yeah, makes me happy.
All right, we got some more Mastodon work. So this is after, before? Can you give me a little timeline on it? Of the covers?
I think I feel like I did all of these in around the same time, because they all have that similar. You can see that crossover. Like similar to the Fallen Torches Medium Rarities cover, where I'd done that border and that. These all would have happened within the same 2 years or something. There's I don't know if it says is it 2018 on that one? I think I'm not sure. They're all within the same 2 or 3 years. They're all pretty close. So I was just enjoying setting up. Certainly inspired by what Paul Romano had done with. He's such a genius with how he would use these beautiful paintings, but then some of it was line art, some of it is then gold patterns and filigree and all these, so many different styles combined. And that's not really something I like. Falling out of having a nice rule book around things feels kind of intimidating, but it's definitely inspired by that, to have the idea of well, what if I have something which is, these gold, and obviously for the post, because they're posters, they would be then printed in metallic gold as well. So I really enjoyed it with this. It just made a lot of sense somehow. And once again, having this sort of mythology of it looking kind of ancient, but kind of space age, and having this idea about, it's fun to write stories about this stuff, like the one with the ape sitting on top of the, I don't even know why I don't know. I just was tripping out one night. Not literally, just in my own mind, just having weird ideas about stuff and just thinking, well, what if kind of, first and foremost, just being driven by something I thought was cool and fun to draw with this ape character, but then having him sitting on top of, I don't know where literally a vision just came from my head, but him sitting on top of this Viking ship front, but it looks as if he's floating through space, and then he's carrying this orb, which I think is some sort of navigation device, some sort of telepathic navigation. He's carrying that thing, and then at the bottom of the poster, you've got these two planets. There's the one planet that he came from and the one he's going to. kind of all dumb stuff, but it helps construct a poster with some sort of vague narrative to it, and then juxtaposing that by using this sort of weird Art Deco, like something that would be from the 1920s French kind of, Great Gatsby shit or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just having that, somehow it works to me with this sort of like Art Deco influenced sci-fi circuit board hieroglyphics. I don't know. Somehow it makes sense. And then these weird little corner things with the little triangles, just making some fictional language. It looks like the kind of shit that when we send that gold disc out to space with the human on it waving and all of these like weird bits of information that we think aliens will understand. It's like we've received a version of that from someone else, some space monkey riding a Viking ship. But I don't know.
You sure you weren't tripping?
No, this is just me drinking some beers one night,
Yeah.
Oh, and also, see, I'm still stuck on hiding, not even really hiding, but if you look on the space monkey, he's got like around his wrist, there's a little remission logo. I guess that's just my favorite one. He's got it kind of hanging around his wrist on like a little giant charm bracelet, just hanging off there at the back. And he's holding a harpoon, which kind of gives a bit of Leviathan vibe as well, I guess. That's kind of like, that was definitely there. It's like having little hints towards the different records, being like, okay, let's throw a little Leviathan nod that he's holding a harpoon and he's at the front of a ship, And then obviously the other one, the Rasputin, though, is way... That's obviously directly Crack the Sky story. I just went deep on reading everything Brian had written about that story and exactly what the what that whole thing is with literally what's kind of articulated in the lyrics of the song of the guy being the paraplegic guy being sucked up into another dimension and coming out in Rasputin's time and needing Rasputin's help to traverse back to his timeline, all of that stuff, so it's like, what's a cool just conjuring up a cool way to visualize that story. And the guy definitely like a Mobius influence thing. The fellow, our boy in the middle floating around in gold, I found the other day just like the reference photos of me just lying on a bench in my kitchen. It's really funny. I actually look like I'm floating. It's really weird. I don't know how I achieved it. But that's the kind of thing, like I can't conjure that shit up out of my mind. Like I need to have reference photos. So it was me lying on the kitchen bench, bunch of photos, and it worked out. And just gave myself a big glowing head.
There's so much you put into each one of these posters. It's really inspiring, man. Like, you have an obsessive interest in like, not everything has to make sense per se, as much as you're just going to put a lot of thought and care into every decision, which is really cool, man.
Thanks. Yeah.
And you're obviously eager to prove yourself with each one. Like that doesn't seem like it's ever slimming down. Like, it seems like you have the inkling to always try to one up yourself, which is great. That's how you get better.
It's so true. There was something you mentioned at the start about, I'm not sure, I don't think this was the terminology you used, but it was similar to the sort of chasing the carrot of, that sort of, something that you're chasing to try and achieve. And for a lot of us, we're always on that path. I don't know whether that's good or bad or healthy or not, who knows, but most of us, if we're making art, we're on it. It was in relation to the AI stuff. I think you mentioned about how if you're just programming something in, it's like, how are you trying to really better yourself and how are you learning and how are you progressing, so this is a great argument for the opposite to that, which is thank you. And you're right. Like I definitely, I'm very much like on to the next thing, it was funny when you asked me to pull up a bunch of, older work and different pieces to share. And I was going back through I went back through some old hard drives. I've lost tons of my work because I'm so bad at archiving it digitally, and there's big gaps of stuff I don't even have the files of anymore, whatever. But I was going back through them and pulling these things up and being like, man, I don't remember. So, I mean, obviously I do remember it, but I'm just like, I'd forgotten about it, or I'm just like, man, I put so much. I went up to see my wife and she's like, how's it going? And it's like, I'm completely insane. Like how, what was I thinking? I put so much work into some of these projects, but that's why, thank you for revisiting with me. Cause it is nice to go back and be like this, this Rasputin one, to be like, okay, well, firstly, I didn't just draw a picture. I went back and read all of Brian's lyrics and ideas and thoughts about the story and all of that stuff, and thought about what that might mean. And then I pulled up a bunch of different marbling images that I made at a different time and place in the archive, and pulled them up, which had also been made by hand, and scanned those in and figured out this like weird color, transition thing and whatnot. And then I created this border, and then I posed lying on my kitchen bench and found all of these old images of Rasputin and read a whole book about Rasputin, and literally and
this
just
is all before you even start.
Just for a concept poster, yeah. And yeah, so, but you could argue at the same time, I could have just been like, yeah, whatever, I'll just draw something cool, which is usually the start of it all, is draw something cool. But in the end, it makes it more fun, it's like, it's not about that's about all of it. It's just, it makes the whole thing more fun and gets you to, dip into more things, veer off into other different art styles and try out different things, have a little flirt with like, I'm actually quite proud. Both of these, typography on both of these, I've made entirely myself from scratch.
Oh, wow.
So they're not actually typefaces at all. Like, they were built like that one on the Art Deco-y kind of one.
Yeah.
But I might have started out with some, but it would have been like literally like Helvetica or something. It wouldn't have looked anything like that. And I would have then just fucked with it, made all of those little angles and just built it out until it was a totally different thing. And then the other one, I don't really know how I did it or what I was thinking, but I really like it. I think I can say that. I don't really say about my drawings that I really ever like them, but I think because typography is not my thing, I feel comfortable being like, actually, I really like that. I'm really proud of it because it's not my thing, But yeah, I don't know what I even did, but it was it was a completely normal flat typeface, and I busted it apart and added these weird lines and was like, cool, okay, So yeah, they're just like custom made typefaces. And I have other weird things that I do. Like, see in the bottom corner, you can see there's text. There's like a tiny line of text upright. One of them is the Roman numerals for the date. But the other one, and this is hidden, or not, it's not really hidden, but it's present on almost all the posters I've ever made for gigs. It's like the longitude and latitude code for the location of the show.
Oh, wow.
Just put there. Purely, the only reason it's that, it's not some weird, crazy meaning behind it. It's just that on old film posters, because I reference a lot of movie posters in building gig posters, and on old movie posters, you'd have like, there was some archival coding system for movies. I don't know what it is. It's probably something, I don't know what it is, but old movie posters, you'll see there's like a code written upright in the corner, and it just looks cool graphically to me because I've grown up loving those posters. So I'm like, I kind of want like a weird, because I think Tyler Stout on his posters, he does it, and it looks like the movie poster logging kind of archive number, but it's like his kids' birthdays or something, but it's on all his posters and it looks fucking cool as a graphic element. So kind of inspired by that, really. So I was like, I want just some random numbers I can put in the corner of my posters just to add something that legitimizes it. So I just came up with this idea. It's like, hey, whatever the so I'll go on Google Maps and find the longitude and latitude of the gig venue and put that. So that should be the one for the Greek theater, and that's the Casino de Paris, whatever. I don't know.
It's cool, man. I mean, it's
cool, weird shit that I do that
it's
makes
like,
me happy.
I mean, I don't want to go into like the entire psychology of it, but you do it for yourself.
Yeah,
you do it for the band, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, all of this trickles down to a good fan experience, like quality work that a fan wants to buy, and they might not pick up everything. That they might just be like, that's a really well drawn ape, and I like how the composition works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they might not be thinking of everything, but the fact that you're putting that much thought into it and like how it ties back into the albums, but it's not forced. I mean, to me, it is fan service to a certain degree too, in a good way. You know, you care about the fan base, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. It makes it more fun for me to construct. And if someone wants to go deeper and look into it, another one I just noticed. So above Rasputin's head, there's like a little symbol, and it's something about the It's a chakra symbol for the solar plexus, and it's because in the story, it's something to do with Bran wrote about how his solar plexus, a fucking umbilical cord comes from it and transports him up into another dimension or some shit. So I was like, okay, cool. So put that symbol in there, So it's like, it's just finding reason behind it.
One effect of my conversation with you is I'm going to look at all my work and be like, I literally just drew all this because I thought it was cool. Or I was thinking art fundamentals, but like...
There's nothing wrong with that though either. That's it. That's the core of it.
I mean,
it's
at the end of the
that.
day, my mind works a certain way and your mind works another way, but we can all learn from each other.
But at the core of it, it is, I say this all the time, I'm not afraid to say it, is that fundamentally we're just drawing shit that looks cool. That's the core of all of it, and that's all that really matters. So it's like me being like, yes, a fucking ape sitting on a Viking ship with a harpoon floating through space. I don't know why, but to me it looks cool, and hopefully if I think it looks cool, other people will too. And for gig posters, that's usually the brief, is like, something looks cool, I say this all the time, but that is what it is, and that's fine. So it's fundamentally, Rasputin's always going to look cool, and if he's like floating in space doing his classic pose surrounded by weird, solar anomalies and things, then that's going to look cool. And then if there's enough time to do it, I'll chuck some Easter eggs in there, decorate it with some stuff. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with just drawing shit that's cool. That's really what it is. Yeah.
All right. I do want to get to the rest stuff, but we will have to pick up the pace just a little. Is that okay?
Cool. Yeah.
All right. So,
what is to be said about these? I don't know. The Grateful Dead one's cool because I feel like that was a big turning point, kind of in a put me map kind of thing, Because if I'm honest, I didn't really know a whole lot about the Grateful Dead. Obviously, I kind of knew a bit, and I knew who they were, I knew the name, and knew the aesthetic and stuff, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. I had to learn a fair bit about it pretty quickly, and then even at that point, I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into with dealing with like Deadhead fans and stuff.
It's very much an American phenomenon.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I was not quite prepared for it, but God bless him, it did very well for me in terms of just in terms of appealing
just like metalheads.
Appealing to a different crowd who up until then we didn't know each other. They didn't know my work, I didn't know much about them, and then putting that poster out and having this brief of getting into that world of psychedelic art. Like, I immediately went out and bought a bunch of books about psychedelic art and got to know all these other... That was probably how I first discovered like Tadanori Yoko, who I mentioned earlier, was through doing this, and all of those guys, Victor Moscoso, all of these guys who did like color vibration and all this shit, and it was super exciting to get into. So it was a huge... Given that brief, I was like, man, I need to do some homework now, and I started getting super into that artwork. Not that my piece is categorically like, I mean, it is and it isn't. Like, it's kind of like my own take on it with it. But then you could also argue a lot of like Victor Moscoso and those things, they were repurposing Art Nouveau art and stuff a lot in those posters. Right. And most of it was kind of copied and pasted and flipped around and all this stuff. So and obviously my art is kind of influenced heavily by Art Nouveau, undeniably as well. So it's kind of like, it makes sense. It's like this, there's a joining of those languages in there. But that one, the Grateful Dead one, super fun to make. Lots of like hand drawn text again, and just like the drawing all of these component parts and then like slamming them all together to make this really just really over the top, like it was like really lavish and just kind of ridiculously over the top piece of artwork. But kind of, to me, one of the few pieces that I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm pretty proud of that one. I stand by it, and it's probably the one that's most heavily bootlegged, which
Well, it's
validates me.
deadheads.
I saw
Yeah,
someone you could buy online on through Etsy from like Redbubble or some shit, a
yeah.
full like giant dress, which is just this printed over the whole dress. I almost bought it, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with this one. And it's also one of those ones I'm kind of like, I don't know if I could do it again. You know, I don't
Yeah.
quite know how I did it. It worked out. I don't quite know how I did it, and I don't know if I could do it again. But that's fine. Just leave it where it is. And then the Sabbath one was, yeah, super cool. To be honest, it's one of those things. I'm like, oh yeah, I made something for Black Sabbath. That hasn't quite sunk in. You know,
Yeah, the
this is like years
well, I think
ago.
it's because it's later era Black Sabbath. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
I don't know.
totally.
I mean, it's still freaking
The
cool.
end.
Like, who am I? You know, to say anything like that. But if it was
No,
like
no,
in their prime, it maybe would be like bigger
totally.
part of your resume. You know?
Yeah, I don't even. I'm. Yeah, it's just like one of those things. I'm like, wow, I guess that happened. But yeah, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with that one. I should. I've never really. I should try and maybe see if I can revisit that art. And I did actually. I think I did do a version without the Sabbath text on it, but it was like a little mini print thing. But yeah, pretty happy with that one. And definitely tried some different weird stuff. Like the way I drew the dress on that is like, I don't know what I was doing. It's totally different to the way I draw others. It's like really dense and kind of went really hog wild on the cross hatching, kind of like, I don't know, Bernie Wrightson, kind of just like really going for it. But yeah, pretty happy with that one. And hand drawn text again. Had like my ex-wife she wasn't carrying a crucifix, it was like just a big log outside the house, I think. But yeah, once again, just having someone pose for it, you know, setting up the shot, getting a bunch of, it's always, if you could one day, if one day I should just pull together all of the ridiculous reference photos of me and my friends and people in my life, lots of me, you know, just like stupid looking photos of like, you know,
a lot
like
of
in most cases, even that one of the Cthulhu Metallica one, it's like my hands, you know, like I'm posing with my hands like this to figure it out. And there's so many of just like people I know and pose in just ridiculous ways, and they always look real funny because it's like always someone in a dressing gown holding a broom or just like some goofy shit.
Yeah, I wear a
whatever
bathrobe
does the
a
job,
lot.
you know.
You know, doing like wizards and stuff.
Yeah, you need that. I've got like sheets that I just regularly pull out, and it's like, okay, we need that on, you know, like, oh, this big dress or whatever, or like when I did, not music related, but I did that Wicker Man poster last year.
Oh yeah, that was sick.
And that they're all like friends of mine, like all the women in it, my wife and three of our friends, and we went to this chapel just a couple of doors down from here and put the Wicker Man music on, had them all wearing these long dresses and dancing around and took the photos, and that's what was the reference for it. So it's all like real shit.
That's cool, man.
Cool. What else we got? Oh yeah, the Pixies. Yeah, that one as well. It was a girl called Fiona, or Little Fee as she was known, who was sweet enough to come to a photo shoot for a few. She was also in the road burn art that I did of the Four Seasons kind of thing, like sort of Mooka inspired seasons thing. That's all her in those, and there was one photo that we took in that session that I loved, and I was like, I'm going to use that for something else. And then when this Pixies one came around and came up with the idea, so it was inspired by the Where Is My Mind, when they got that I was swimming in the Caribbean, about the lyric about the little fish coming by or whatever. So that was what I was trying to illustrate in that, and I realized I had this photo of her where she's kind of lying down looking all dreamy looking. So I was like, okay, yeah, she looks like she's in this dreamland in this photo. So just got that in there and used it for that, and then made the I was pretty happy with that Pixies poster, actually, because this one is literally like 3 colors or something.
Yeah.
Well, it's the key line, it's the green, it's the blue. There's like one sort of slightly darker color in there around her body that's on her hair, and the rest of it, and then the fish is just silver. Actually, see, I'm lying. It's not. It feels like it should be like 4 colors, but it's the
Then
key
there's the
line,
white.
the white, the
Yeah.
silver of the fish, the green, the blue. That so yeah, we're up to 6 already. But I think 6. That sounds right. So that's fair. That's like a decent number. Not yeah. And then the other one, kind of similar deal. But
Were these
yeah,
made around the same time, or?
I think they were. The one on the left was definitely the first one. I
Okay.
think was definitely the first one, and then the one on the right came a little bit after. The one on the right, I drew the body as one piece, and then weirdly, I don't know why. Well, I do know why. I think it's just it made sense. The wing I drew on clayboard separately because it
Okay.
just made sense to be able to just draw it black. And I think mainly maybe just an economical approach, drawing the wing black and just scratching in all of those white highlight lines. Just
Yeah, you
felt
get
like
that feather texture. Pretty cool.
yeah, it just worked. And once again, there's something kind of exciting to me about mixing those different styles, like having the one thing drawn in the positive, one drawn in the negative, or whatever it means. Just like having two different textures sidling next to each other just feels exciting on the page to me, rather than it just being kind of flat. And then that weird, I think of it being kind of like Art Deco kind of thing. Once again, it's fun playing with golds and metallics because it's something that, to me, separates screen print from a lot of other art. I know technically there are some crazy printing methods where you can print spot varnish and all this nonsense in like digital means, but in screen print, very broadly speaking, the thing I like about screen print is that you can print things like metallic inks and very tactile, heavy inks that you can almost touch,
Yeah.
well, you can feel them, almost like a braille kind of thing, which you don't get with a lot of digital methods. So I always kind of lean into that and always use metallic inks if I can,
So do you
finding ways.
tell the printer then? Like you indicate it in the digital illustration, then you're like, hey, I intended for this to be.
Right, exactly. So
Okay.
you would have, in the Photoshop file, so it'd be a Photoshop file, your top layer is your key line, and then you've got each color on a separate layer. But one of them, I'd label it usually in block capitals and say, metallic layer, and it can be any color you want, but often gold or silver, usually gold. I'll say metallic, and then when I'm sending the file to the printers, I'll usually send them a bunch of notes, because you can never be too careful. You never know if they're going to read that on the file. They might just go through a file and not notice that it says metallic or whatever. So I'll always, every time I deliver a file, I'll send some very politely written but clear notes that say, notes, layer 3 is a metallic ink. Layer 4 is a 50% opacity, or whatever the things are. Usually it's just a couple of little things, but one of them, if it was that, I'll make sure to say it and point it out clearly, But yeah, so that one, I used that gold ink. I really, once again, that weird Art Deco curly line, I don't know where that came from. It's one of those things, I did it once, haven't done it again, don't know what it means, but it worked. And I think it worked in that case. Just finding an interesting, weird way to play with the border and have it come into some sort of weird motif just to throw things off a little bit. Really, I think it's just trying to fuck with things a little bit to make it strange and interesting and unique. Really that to feel interesting, exciting, and challenging for me, and for me to feel like, oh yeah, I accomplished, or I challenged myself and I came up with something a bit different and interesting that I don't even quite understand, but it's doing something for me. It's one thing drawing a cool picture and making it look a certain way, but it's like if I can just touch that little edge of the void of something that's a bit more like tantalizing and exciting, similar kind. I don't know. Another little trick that I do in everything always pretty much is like to kind of fuck with myself and whoever's looking at it, is that you notice it on these. So how even on the left one, everything is harnessed inside this one main exterior frame, apart from one petal on the right. And then one little bead and bit of hair at the bottom, and that's it. So it's like everything else is inside that frame, but those one or two little things are just teasing over the edge, which to me is super fun and just adds something it's like so subtle, but it just adds some movement to it. Just having the vibration of that one little thing overlapping. Like if I can make it just one thing, that's just, I find it funny, And then on the one on the right, there's a similar thing where there's just there's a little more going on there, but that one little bead on the right and the little petal add a bit of movement to it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Man. Thanks for sharing all these details too. Like a lot of this stuff's very helpful for me because the digital coloring part I haven't dabbled with a lot just because I don't know. I really enjoy doing black and white ink work and being at my drawing desk, but I know I'm gonna get requests for it, so I need to learn some of the tips and the tricks so it prints well.
I would say the key thing with it is that I'm certainly more comfortable working in black and white as you are. I feel like I'm totally akin with what you've described and your relationship to it. Like I feel the same, and I think of myself. I think of myself as an artist who works in black and white, actually. Because that's what the original drawings are, and that's that when you. I do feel like once I've left that original drawing, I'm in kind of no man's land. I'm in this whole other realm, but I feel very close to what you described of being like, no, this is my domain that makes sense. And working with color is really hard, It's like I still find it hard. I find it extremely challenging. And even though you might think that even these two pictures, you might think, oh yeah, so I did what I just described. I drew the piece, I scanned it in, I blocked in this color, chose 3 colors, and then boosh, ready to go. Reality was, I probably spent like 2 weeks fucking around with the colors trying to figure out how to make them work. Like we don't see that part of the process. We're just like, oh yeah, there you go, that seems to work. But the reality is, it's not like straight to finish line. I don't really know like the amount of changes you would see along the way. Yeah, it's a whole journey, and there's elements of color theory you start to learn mainly just by the doing of it. But there's certain things you learn about like complementary colors and all this sort of art school stuff, which I have a bit of a knowledge, not much really at all, but you learn it from the doing of it. But fundamentally, to me, colors are real difficult to wrangle, but it makes it all the more rewarding when you do something that feels exciting, and does work. Like I feel excited by, in that right hand example, the blue color really pops and leaps off the page, and that makes me excited. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing something there with that's having a cool effect and like not just sitting there. So, and that the white being so bright and kind of punching out, that stuff's it's a tough kind of mistress, it's like unforgiving it's very easy to get it wrong and fuck it up, and tough to wrangle. But I'd say the best way is to go in tentatively and dip your toe in the water and limit yourself. That's the main thing. I think if you're making that transition from working purely in binary black and white and then being like, okay, I'm going to open up this palette of color now, and I'm going to use digital watercolors or whatever brushes. I've tried that shit before, and you can just go insane. You're just like, I don't know where to begin. I don't know where it ends. I don't know what the parameters are. If you go in with the rule of being like, okay, I can choose 3 colors, no more, and that's what I'm going to complete this piece with, or even 2 colors, like just keep it really, or 2 colors and a paper color. That would be a good one. Like don't work, like lock in a really interesting paper color underneath, and then use that as a color in which is something common in most of my work. You can see in these two is that the skin color is the paper color, and it almost always is. There's occasionally different things like that Grateful Dead one where it's like a blue figure in it, but most of the time, because I find if you color the skin, unless it's a weird anomaly like the blue skin in the Grateful Dead one, if you color the skin, it starts to look very cartoonish, I find. Whereas if it's the paper color, it's a lot classier, and it's just, I don't know why, but it's something I've learned that works for me.
Well, the values are driven by the shading of the ink work instead of it being like, I can follow what you're saying.
Yeah,
I think just like specific to me, those are all great points. It's like if I'm doing watercolor in a painting, I'm comfortable there. It's not necessarily color per se. Of course, I can improve there. It's literally knowing how to work Photoshop and like the technical details of like making sure that it's going to be good for printers and all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like that's where I'm like, I just haven't done it. So it's lack of experience on my part,
Yeah, but that's fine too. Once again, you learn it from the doing, and you learn it from
Yeah.
building a relationship with the printers, ideally. So like, I've worked with one or two printers consistently for a long time. Right now, I work with Prince of Thieves up in Leeds in north of England, and I've worked with them for a long time now on most of the UK-based projects and print work that I do. And the beauty of that is through that work back and forth, we come to learn about each other, because everyone sets this. There's no one particular way. All artists will set their work up in different ways. Some of them will be like, figure it out with this pile of, like make a real old pig's ear of it, and others will be immaculate and perfect and ready to go. I probably fall somewhere in the middle, but I'll send stuff over, and they'll Tommy, who works there, he's a brilliant guy to work with, because he's incredibly meticulous and in huge eye for detail, and you feel like the work is representing me, but it's also representing them, as a print house. It's like, I don't want to make my, I put pressure on myself to want to make it good, but ultimately it becomes between the two of you both, and like, this is going to represent us both. We both want to create something of high quality, even if no one even notices how good the quality is. So yeah, we'll just send the files back and forth and tweak things and make sure the trapping and that sort of stuff is in place in the registration and this sort of thing. But yeah, it's a learning curve, but it's not too much to learn if you're only using limited palettes of color, and if you're, and also the other thing I would say is, if your illustration work is pretty detailed and with a lot of line work and stippling, all of these things, really you want to be pretty simple on the coloring, like this image on the left. If you were to take away that key line, it's just like a block of green, a bunch, you can see how all of the blue is just harnessed in those little petals. It's incredibly simple, really. So you kind of can't go wrong, as long as it's all set pretty well for the printing. But yeah.
Good points. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So we have a few more. Actually, yeah. With the Jack White, I had one specific question. Is that like the paper marbling that you were talking about with behind that horse?
Totally.
That's so cool.
The fun thing about that was, so the paper marbling, I did it myself, learned how to do it, got the liquids and all the inks, and then you get all swirly with them. You drop the paper on, you peel it off, hang it up to dry. Saved all the best ones. This was one of my favorite ones. But then I had to scan them in, and I had to then separate the colors so that they were screen printable. I don't know how I did it. It's the whole thing, harnessing the colors, whatnot, breaking them up into sections. This is only like two colors, I guess, the black and the blue. But the thing that was super fun about this, so this was right when I was in the thick of getting excited about putting the marbling patterns in with the illustration, because it's interesting to have something that the illustration is so meticulously thought out and so sort of painstakingly rendered, right, and then having the chaos of the marbling, which is super organic and you can't really control it. So it felt interesting to just slam those things together. And the thing that was most fun with this is that when I took that paper marbling, put that down, dragged in this image of the horse that I'd drawn up, and kind of floated it around, I was suddenly like, hey, it's having a conversation now with the paper marbling in a really interesting way, where if you look at the top of the horse's head, he's got that little wisp of hair and his ear sticking out, and then these other bits really echo the shape of his ear in a really weird way. Like the bottom, the black bit there is his ear, but then there's like these other shapes that look kind of the same.
You're right.
It's really, it kind of is doing something. And then down where his front hoof is kind of smashing down, it looks like, to me, like he's splashing in a puddle of water or something. Like these things feel like this ethereal movement. There's just a beauty in how you can take these two unrelated things and he's just laid over it and then moving it around till it finds a space that it feels really echoes. There's lines that sort of echo the movement of his leg that's rearing up and his nose, and then there's these weird ethereal shapes underneath his belly. And it feels to me like it's meant to be like, I can't separate the two images. It looks like that's this ethereal movement around him. But they wasn't intentionally created like that. It was just an interesting experiment of what happens if I put these things together. And then I really enjoyed the typography thing. Once again, one of those things, I'm like, did this thing once, probably will never do it again. Don't quite know what I was thinking or where I got it from, but I having the repeated staggered 3 different colors in there. And a good example of having a limited palette, because it's for Jack White, of course you can only use blue. That was one of the rules, because he was doing that. Yeah, because he's doing that whole color coded thing. So it's like, it's got to be blue. I really appreciated that, actually, doing it for him. He was, the rules were, the only colors can be black and white and blue. And you had to kind of ask special permission. I was like, I usually use like a sort of craft colored paper to print on, which is kind of brown, but it's like the paper. And I got a pass on that. They approved it, thankfully. So I got to use like the sort of tan paper. But they're extremely, because he's got that mentality of like archiving things meticulously and everything is taken very seriously. You can't make any test prints or APs or any of this stuff. It's like really strict, limited edition. And then they take number 3 of all of them, because he's obsessed with the number 3, like all the Third Man records and all that stuff. And he archives number 3 of every print that's ever made for himself. I'm imagining, when they say that, I'm imagining in some big vault, with like the big 3 emblem on it or something. But
I mean, I've been to his
cool
record
stuff.
label plant, so maybe.
Oh, and the other rule was no wolves.
Wolves?
Yeah, I guess because people went a bit crazy on the wolves for a while with posters and band stuff, didn't they? There was a period when everyone was just like going wild for putting wolves and things. Maybe just thought. I think so. Yeah, they definitely were, weren't they? People were crazy about wolves for a while, and maybe he just saw it too much. People kept making Jack White posters with wolves, maybe, but no wolves. And then the Deftones one on the left was, to be honest, this came up earlier when we were talking about Jesus Lizard, and I passed it off as saying like, oh, I basically just ripped off the Jesus Lizard down cover and changed the dog to a horse. That's not strictly true. It was definitely inspired by that aesthetically, but to me it's a little bit deeper. I mean, it's a simple image, but to me it feels like how that record feels to me was more what it's about. That White Pony album has a certain feel to it, which is, it's weird. I don't know. I remember the record coming out and it kind of feels like you've been taken by the hand and walked into this weird, giant, sexy, haunted house with some weird, I don't know what's going on in there, but it's like a weird, very specific feeling that record takes you somewhere, but there's a few lyrics in there. Like he says that when he's singing that, I could float here forever, like that shit. That just conjures up strange images. That was definitely something that came to mind. So yeah, I just like the idea of this weird floating. take the pony and just have him like floating in this unexplainable thing with this, and then by putting that little white light at the bottom, just posing an unanswerable question about like, where is he? What dimension is he in? What's going on? Trying to, not in a flippant way of just like, oh, whatever, it doesn't, it's your crosswords puzzle, work it out yourself. It was more authentically more like, that record makes me feel ways that I can't quite articulate and understand, and I want to make something that might potentially do the same.
Looks like a Jordan Peele movie poster, like a Jordan Peele film.
Yeah, like the
Nope and stuff.
What do they call the thing in Get Out?
I don't know what they call that.
It's got a name, hasn't it? He falls. I don't know why I'm blanking on it.
I haven't seen that movie in a minute.
He falls down into that like
oh yeah, the little void thing. Yeah,
yeah. It's called something. It's going to come to me in a moment.
Cool, dude. Well, here's an option. We can keep trucking on, or we could call it here because we've covered quite a bit, and just do a couple wrapping like. I have one more question for you, but how do you feel? What do you want to do?
You're cool, man. I'm happy. If you want it, I can't remember how much of this visual stuff we got. We can either blast through it and I can give you like one thought on each one, or we can just keep.
Let's do one thought on each one. That way people can see your work.
Okay, cool.
And I'll just shut my mouth. All right.
Emma Ruth Rundle poster similar. I get this is not going to be one thought, but it's kind of it's one of the ones I was asked the other day, what's one piece that you're most proud of? And I was like, I don't know if I have one I'm most proud of, but that's one of the ones that I feel like completely happy with, which is rare. So yeah, another idea of smashing together a bunch of different styles, like a portrait, but then some real loose stuff around the edge, a bit of marbling, like a little bit of marbling, and then the horse was drawn on a scratch board. So it's like multiple. It's a portrait drawn in pen and ink, then got the brushes in and got real crazy around the edge of the portrait, then layered on a horse drawn separately on a scratch board, on a clay board, and then used the paper marbling. So it's, yeah, many elements. And the whole translucent thing, like the horse is actually translucent. You can kind of see her showing through a little bit. I've never done that with any other poster. Don't know if I'll do it again. Just a one-time experiment that I think paid off, because I think it's a pretty cool effect. And maybe that's why I like it, because it doesn't look like it doesn't look like I made it. Maybe I'm just like, I don't know how I did this, but
I feel like that cool. One and this one, it's like the design is just as important as the illustration. You know what I mean?
I thought you were going to say you went through a horse period for a while.
Well, dude, I'm really in a horse period because I'm right next to a horse farm, so I'm with you. Oh, no, I love horses. Yeah.
Oh, that's great, man. You have all the good references as well.
Yeah, if you need any, I always got some. Yeah. American horses. I saw you on Instagram were showing some like really
there's a lot of
horses.
A lot of cool wild horses up here. Yeah, but it's hard to get them. They usually just, like, you know, they're not doing exciting shit that's going to look dramatic in a poster. Okay, Foo Fighters, London. This is a big, you know, it's a big poster for me in terms of getting shit out there and a feather in the cap. And this one, I'm pretty happy with this one too. I think I had the idea straight out the gate. I was like, I want to do some weird sci-fi thing, and you know, including the disintegrated pistol off the first record, because I was kind of like, you know, I love the first Foo Fighters record, and it kind of goes off the rails for me after that. But like, so I was like, I want to show people that I like the first record. So I was like, take the pistol from that, and it just extrapolate out this whole universe built around the pistol and a story behind it and all this nonsense. And I got like the Foo Fighters logo on her arm there. This one's a lot of research, though. I had to research fucking spacesuits. It was like based on a proper Russian cosmonaut suit, and I had to figure out what it would look like from different angles. There's a shit ton of research into trying to figure out how to draw some. I can't just make that shit up. Like trying to draw someone in a spacesuit, and yeah, it was a ton. But then coming up with loads of weird little emblems and stuff. But I like the idea of it being kind of grayscale. It's all just silver metallics and things in the poster, and I like the idea of having just the really, really simple typography, being like the image is super complex. I kind of learned this at a certain point. I was like, if the image is that complex, unless it's a Grateful Dead poster, make the text simple as you can. Just slam it at the bottom like a movie poster would. You know, pull it off. Don't try and overlap. Just don't even try and just let the illustration do the heavy lifting. Slam all of the text real straight sans serif at the bottom. Slam it down there, and you're okay, you know. And if you deliver it confidently in that way, and I felt good about that result of just I kind of visualized it real quick of like, yeah, just super simple on the text, real complex on the drawing, and yeah, kind of worked out. But it was, to be honest, that whole period of doing this poster feels like, you know, from the outside, people will be like, cool, you did that poster, that worked out, and great, you know, congratulate you for it, which is beautiful. But it was a real tough time, because I was doing that one in the same summer. I was asked to do that Queens of the Stone Age poster and a Nine Inch Nails poster, which were all within the same like month. And I was trying to do them all and balance them all, and they were like, "You can do it." I was like, "I don't know if I can." I'm just like, literally lost my mind. I was just like working so hard. And this one, Prince of Thieves were printing it, and I really put them under so much pressure, because they were trying to print all of these posters literally the day of the show. I went down to the show in the stadium, and the posters had not arrived by like,
oh my God,
the doors had opened, the posters hadn't arrived, and people were like asking about them. Kind of, it added a bit of drama to the whole poster thing for the people who really wanted to get them at the show. But it was like, they eventually got there like halfway through I mean, it was a long, you know, it was an all day kind of gig, but they did arrive, and were kind of rushed through into the, you know, the merch stands and whatnot, and they sold and stuff. But it was a whole unnecessary drama trying to like get them done. But yeah, tricky sometimes, though. I don't know. It's got to push through and make it happen. But
it's hard to turn away big clients like that.
Yeah, and it's not always easy. And also, we're not all that great at figuring out how to schedule, balancing out the ambition of what you're trying to create when you've got those kind of projects, but knowing to get it delivered in the right amount of time and allowing time for the issues potentially with printing, and not the issues with printing, but issues with me setting up it the right, the file in the right way and all these things. There's a lot going on with that one. The Earth poster on the left is kind of the next step after making those marbling pieces. Was I got excited about the idea of kind of learning from that how the marbling behaves and learning to kind of draw it just as a weird experiment. So this is kind of that, really, just making weird. I guess I was getting more into like weird sci-fi art and thinking about drawing psychedelic marble in patterns mixed with, I don't really know what I was thinking about, some weird organic floral stuff, which is always present. There's always just cool shit you see. Usually it'll be having like flowers, like a vase of flowers in the house, and then seeing them die and seeing the amazing, beautiful shapes of all these curling petals and being like, that makes me really happy. And if I can make a little mandala of those, that will look good. And if I like it, hopefully other people will too. There's all sorts of there's like little bits of honeycomb and just weird shit, but yeah, just trying to make something weird and psychedelic and like just a strange psychedelic poster. But yeah, I'm pretty down with that one. It makes me kind of happy. And then the Dylan portrait, that was drawn purely on a scratchboard. So I think I based on like 2 different photos of him and kind of spliced them together to make the lighting look the way I wanted, and then just did it. That's kind of nice to sometimes just do like a straight portrait. It's no fucking around. You just like, I just need to draw this and do it well and try and get it accurate and but also characterful and capture a mood and all of that sort of stuff. And then I was pretty pleased with the layout, like of just kind of inspired by old record art from like the 60s and things, like an old 60s kind of country record, but kind of bleaker looking. And I think that weird emblem at the bottom, there was I think it was something Dylan had used on his solo album, and I lifted it from that emblem, I'm pretty sure. But I enjoy, like on the right you can see there's like the little Sargent House, which was the label that he put his record out on, and the little numerals. Those things, I probably asked Sargent House, like, is it cool to put your logo on here? But that stuff is very much kind of similar, because I got the same logo on the other poster too. It's just cool aesthetic stuff you can use, It's not like I was told, you got to put the record label logo on there. I asked to put that on there. And same with like, you'll see on most of them, like whether it's like Foo Fighters or whoever, if they have a cool enough looking logo that I think I can use and add to the bottom to add some weight. And it's very much inspired by movie poster art, really, like movie posters always have, like 20th Century Fox or whatever. It just adds some, there's just a language in poster art that we've made for ourselves, that
sense of scale too, like you're talking about earlier.
Right. If you make it with the scale as well, if you make those things smaller, it makes the poster feel bigger. Like if you block out those little emblems in the corner, you're like, yeah, this could be like a little flyer, But that gives us a sense of like, oh yeah, well, if they're that big, I can't quite read them now. So for me to read them, your brain does all this for you. You don't really think that, but you subconsciously suddenly it feels larger from having all these smaller little elements in there, and it just weighs it down in a good way to have stuff very movie poster like just stacked at the bottom.
Absolutely.
It's good. Cool. So Pixies poster, pretty happy. This one's a bit chaotic because it's like a tour poster, so I had to have a million dates on it. I don't really know how I feel about this one, but I do like. I kind of like the whole type weird
the way it disintegrates into the thing.
Yeah.
I
think what I did was I had the idea for it, but it was kind of like riffing on that sort of Art Deco type thing I'd played with before, and other posters, these fine lines, and I guess I did with the other Pixies poster, these fine border lines, and then I printed out, I typed out Pixies in some very just clean but kind of Art Deco, just very plain sans serif type, and then scanned it and just dragged it through the scanner so it went all warped and fucked up, and then scanned that in. So that's what you're seeing there. I did like probably 20 of them or something, and did them in different ways, and then chose the best one or the one that looked coolest, which was that one, and then scanned that in, put that on there, and then pulled a bunch of the marbling stuff that I had and just did similar to what I mentioned with the horse, just kind of started floating them around each other until something locked in. I was like, okay, this feels like now they're one and the same. And yeah, just kind of fucked around with them a bit and made that just this solid gold kind of thing. And then it's doing exciting things similar with the horse. If you see the corner of the skull, the mouth of the skull, it's got that kind of wisp of gold kind of pouring out of it, which is just kind of, you know, I didn't manipulate it to do that. I would have probably erased some bits, but just floating it around and finding this, oh yeah, suddenly this thing is happening, and letting that be. And then I think that was like the face, I don't know where I found it, so that, from some old book or something. I think the face was like some 1920s model or something, but then the hand, it was like my sister. I was like, can you hold this pot in your hand and do this? You know, it's like her hands. I don't think I had a skull. I have a skeleton and a full skeleton now, but I don't think I had a skull at the time that she could hold. I think it was just like a plant pot. And then the Foo Fighters one, if I'm completely honest, which I'm going to be, not crazy about this poster. And the reason is because I tried to do it as like a sequel, obviously, as a sequel to the other one. So it's like the same image, same character, same spacesuit, but from the front. And then instead of it being riffing on the first album, it riffed on like the only other Foo Fighters album I like was Color and the Shape, and made, you know, that's in the center is the Color and the Shape thing. And at the back as well, we got it kind of zoomed in. There are bits that I like. There are bits I like, bits I don't like, and it works. It's fine. It's like it does the thing of being like revisit the thing. It's basically a sequel to the last one, but we're going to make it portrait instead. We're going to do the same things. You know, the title treatment's the same, and certain things. It works fine, but I think deep down in my heart, I kind of feel like I kind of phoned it in a little bit, if I'm honest, because of that. Because of not coming up with something new. Basically, you know, it's fine and it works, but it's like making a movie sequel and it being like it's kind of the same movie, but you just like switched out the villain. You know, it's like, oh, you just retreaded the same movie that you knew people would dig. So I feel like a weird guilt about it. Like I could have done something different, but to be honest, I was probably pushed for time. I probably had a million things on, and it was like, hey, can you do this? Yep, but I'm gonna go straight to this idea. So
right, yeah, you didn't have enough time to brainstorm other ideas, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I like that it kind of feels like a cassette layout. You know what I mean? Like you kind of see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be cool on a cassette. Man, that's something I've never designed a cassette tape. I've had a few. I've got quite a significant number. I say a significant number, like probably 5, but that's quite a lot of like records that I've made that have ended up on cassette. Bizarrely,
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Well, the Cave In one, you had that picture of it.
Yeah, it's always nice to see. All
right. And this is the last one.
See, okay, this is an example of one where I definitely also did a sequel, but I kind of like this one because it was like, okay, take fundamentally the same concept, but be like, it's like a sequel, but it's like it's like the difference between like Gremlins and Gremlins 2. It's like, make this film like completely mental. Like do what the one has got. The one is like, the one on the left like makes sense and has a certain kind of rule set to it, and then the other one has been like, okay, you can use colors now, you know, you can use perspective, and you could. So yeah, it was definitely intentional, like giving myself there are certain things in common with the two where I've kept them the same, but it was like, it's almost like a little kid being like, okay, now you've learned to do this, now you can have this box of paints, you know. So it's like I'd done it, I proved it to myself the one time I could achieve this certain thing, and then the second time being like, okay, I'm going to let you use colors now, and I'm going to let you move these things around. And I stole the idea from an old horror movie. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I was out in, I think, Austin in some like flea market, and they had this old, bright, crazy horror movie poster for some super kitsch kind of 1960s horror movie, and it had this image where they had that basically, like a skull and a woman's face, and the one eye was like crossing into the skull, and I was like, took a photo of it, and I was like, gonna put that on file for one day. I'm gonna use that idea, and that's where that came from, and used it for this. But yeah, pretty cool. Always cool to do posters for them. And I did. Okay, here's a little Easter egg I tell you. Then on the one on the Finsbury Park one, there's I nicked that like rated R, little classification thing, because obviously they got that like rated R record. But I wanted more, like I said, just anything I can slam down the bottom. Like I've got that little logo thing, anything I can put at the bottom just to give it weight and make it interesting. So I took that rated R thing. But I can't remember off the top of my head what it says, but I changed all the text so it just says weird shit. So it's like, but relating to Queens. So I took the verbiage that it says on the normal rating thing. So for example, where it says contains violence or something, I changed it to villains, because their record was called Villains at the time. So it like contains villains and something. I don't know. But yeah, it's one of those things like, if you have the poster, you can read it, because you're not going to read it even at this scale on the JPEG. You're not going to read it online, So give them some little gifts for people who actually buy the posters,
Totally, man. Hey, dude, we've been talking for close to 3.5 hours.
So the fucking Joe Rogan experience.
You said it's
great, man. I love it.
But yeah, dude, this was a blast, man. And a lot of good insights too. If anything, it's like a poster art masterclass, because a lot of the artists I've had on to this point have been album and t-shirt artists primarily, and it's a whole different like thought process with poster art. I've had a little bit of overlap there, but cool. You offered a lot of really good insights, man.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it, and I think I do feel that the reason that I found myself really staying in that lane for a while of mainly poster art is because it just feels like both a really simple, focused, clear briefing on what to do, and as I said, like not too much art direction and freedom to create with it, but at the same time you're also doing the thing of what a lot of graphic design is geared towards, which is almost like advertising, conversational conversation with an audience, communication, so
yeah.
As much as I can play it down to be like, oh, just make something that looks cool, that is part of it. You want to catch people's eyes, you want people to want to look at it and enjoy it, but the communication part is also interesting and fun, whether it's literal wordage communication or whether it's visual communication or whatever. But it's a fun little playground to operate in, I find.
Final question. What would be like one piece of advice you'd have for aspiring illustrators, just of any type? Like, I guess ones that want to work with bands. We could leave it at that.
Okay. My kind of my go-to, because I believe in it, for if I have young illustrators who are just kind of coming up and working hard and making cool art, or have just come out of art school maybe, or in art school, and they're like, man, I just really want to start working with bands, I want to be making record covers, I want to be making t-shirts, posters, whatnot. And they'll often say, can you check out if you could take a look at my work, that could be cool, let me know what you think or what you might want to advise. And what you'll often see, and it's very much like a post-art school situation, what you'll see is they'll show you this kind of one-stop shop array of all of the things they can do, which is like, look, I can do typography, I can do illustration, I can make poster art, I can use colors, I can do black and white, I can all of these different things. And it's all it can all be very accomplished, beautifully made work. But when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, if I was in a band, I'd be like, I don't know what I'm going to get, like this person. It's easy to think, and they very much will. This is kind of the mindset you'll often come out of art school with, because art school is very much about offering you all these different opportunities to work in different styles, try different disciplines and different things, different mediums, and then you come out being like, well, I've learned all of this. Surely I need to now prove this and this, or this is the merit of what I have to offer is that I can do it all. Whatever you want from me. But in reality, if you can find whatever you're honest, maybe it's easier said than done, but like if you can find an honest, true voice of your own, a visual, a style that is true to you that you're going to enjoy making, because that's going to come across. But it's almost like it should be easier in a way to be able to be like, all that stuff, anything you're not bothered about, out the window. Don't worry, you can know a bit about it. It's good to know a bit about typography and design, layout, all this stuff. But if you really want to be just drawing it using painting and brushes, or drawing in pens, or whatever the style is, drawing in pencil, stippling, cross-hatching, whatever it is, focus on that and just put out. I mean, the classic thing is put out the work that you want to make. Show the kind of work you want to make. Even if secretly at home you're doing watercolors of woodland creatures or whatever other thing, it's like, if that's not what you want to be doing out there, it's like, well, keep that to yourself and put out make the kind of work you want to make it in a style where and obviously what I'm talking about very much is, right now, most of us promote our work through like Instagram. That's just the truth of it. We want to all be like, oh, social media, whatever. It's like, reality is, for me, all those commissions, everything we talked about today, I even said, like, first started talking to all the Mastodon guys through there. Like most of the bands, pretty much all of the bands that I've worked with over the last like decade, that's where it's come from. Is being on Instagram and talking usually directly with the bands, and you'll often get to working with management at some point to the sort of cross T's, dot the I's and stuff. But generally, it starts out. Thankfully, I feel kind of blessed to be in that situation, but to be able to talk directly with the bands and stuff. But that's where it is. That's very much the shop front of like showing what you have to offer. So make that as focused as you can, because if definitely a less is more, like share less stuff, but make it consistent, purely so that if someone vibes with it, a prospective client sees it and they're like, this guy's work is cool, they want to know what it is, they want to be like, because then they have the confidence to say, hey, do your thing. They're not going to show you like, oh, look, here's a Frank Frazetta paint, can you make it look like that? It's like, they're going to be like, no, we're employing you because we like your shit. And so the more you get to prove that, the more then they'll be like, okay, do your thing. And then once you start doing that, you can pick up momentum and start to hone in your, So most of the time now, after doing that, it's been that way for a while, I suppose. After doing it for a certain amount of time, I'm fortunate enough that it's like, if someone asks me to do a poster of it, it's like, they know they're going to get a bunch of orbs and petals and certain aesthetic things that it's like, hey, you asked me to do it.
Yeah.
You've seen my shit. You know what my visual language is, and unless you tell me otherwise, it's going to look like this thing. So that would be my my advice: is try and hone something that's and no, even if you're doing other things, choose to put out something that's focused, so that people will, because much more likely approach you if they think they know what they're going to get, and make it something you're going to enjoy and feels good.
That's a great point. And similar advice with my last guest too, who also like has developed a very like, unique and consistent style, like a consistency to what you're talking about. And like, I mean, I'll be critical of myself, but maybe you too, but like, I've been exactly what you're talking about. Like not even probably even that long ago, of like being a little aimless, like being talented, always room to grow, but like aimless, 1 week I'm doing a dog portrait, next week I'm doing, something else. So like I've been there, for sure. And like what you're saying is absolutely true, because I've gotten a lot better, I feel like, in the last few years by just being focused.
Yeah.
So were you at that? Did you have that same issue at some point, being a little aimless?
I don't really know if I did, and it's weird because when I think back to really like starting out, I don't quite know what I was doing. I don't quite know what my mindset. It's interesting now to look back on it. I don't quite know what my mindset was when I was really starting out, embarking on it. I think, fortunately, I guess I was just in my own little world, trying to figure out this visual language. Almost like, yeah, okay, I'll draw this thing, but I'm almost on my own little path, little quest with it. So it naturally went that way, where I guess people could be like, oh yeah, you're doing this thing over here, we want a piece of that, you know. Without, I didn't have to really think of it or curate it that way, because I became very fixated on a style. But that said, if I'm honest, I've kind of always been that way in terms of, to me, if you look back on shit that I was drawing when I was like 10 years old, like all the signs are there. Like I was just, my folks would say to me, they would buy me like packs of all the different 100 colors of pens, and I just pull a black one out and chuck the others to one side, and then that would run out, and they buy me another black one, So I was always always focused on. I wasn't much for color. I was always about black and white line work, and that whole style always appealed to me. So I suppose it just felt normal to focus in that way. But I think then the more you do it, and the more you get recognized for a style, you I don't know, not like I'd be wanting to sort of play to the crowd and try and play the hits or whatever, I think, but it can be this sort of cool self-fulfilling prophecy in a good way of just like building momentum and becoming its own thing, So I would say if you're in a period of what you just described of not really being sure, then the positive way you could look at that, it could be like, well, hey, I enjoy painting, drawing dog portraits, and I enjoy painting, and I enjoy pen and ink. They're all cool things, but still, just maybe choose to say like, I can actually do them all, maybe under pseudonyms, but I can. But if I really want to do the pen and ink thing, that's the style I ultimately want to do for bands or whatever. Just be like,
your advice is specific to
curate that.
Yeah, well, band members who are giving you 10 seconds of their attention, they need to figure you out like that, and art directors too.
Yes,
that's what your advice really is. It's not a matter of, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but like, it's not a matter of like, you can't get better at other things, because that can even make your specific thing better. But like, yeah, it's
a great way to think of it. I do enjoy it as much as I like to talk romantically about pen and ink work, and I definitely do. Yeah, I do. I like to talk about art in a sort of certain romantic way, and not so much about like the business side of it or selling yourself or whatnot. But that would be it. If my second point, if in terms of advice, would be, you kind of have to know how to hustle a bit. You just do. You have to figure out, especially if it comes to wanting to make a career out of it, make money out of it. You got to figure out like, what kind of artist am I? And how, because it's different for everyone. Like, if I was the kind of artist who could just be like, there are lots of amazing artists out there that can make a t-shirt in an afternoon and be like, boosh, there's a t-shirt out the door. They would make money from, doing maybe low cost, like their fee is low, but they can churn them out, Whereas for me, if someone's like, hey, I'll pay you $200 to a t-shirt, I'm like, that's cool. But if I spend a month on it, it's like, not going to pay my rent, So ask the other guy who can do it in an afternoon, and he's your guy. But so for me, I got to figure out other ways to do it, and be smart about making print editions, and that's how that all kind of took off. But yeah, just figuring out, okay, I need some longevity out of this. If I'm going to spend a month drawing a piece, and I know that the fee that there's not money in music like there used to be. The maximum they're going to pay you, even for record covers, is not that much. So it's like, I need to get some longevity out of this thing. So I need to figure out making art prints and other ways to repurpose it and speak very nicely to the people who commissioned it and say, hey, are you cool with me doing these other things on the side? Because these are my reasons, and trying to be really honest about it. Yeah. So yeah, you got to be able to hustle with it. So also with that in mind, if you're, what you just said now, that about the two or three, it's like an elevator pitch situation. It's like, if the reality is, if someone lands, even if someone's like, oh, hey, I know some dude in some band, and then they're like, we're looking for some record band. I'm like, you should check out my mate Lee, he's fucking killer illustrator, go and check out his work. But then they click on your page, and like you said, if they see this whole array of crazy different things, they'll be like any of us would. You look at it and be like, I don't know what I'm looking at, on to the next thing, because all of us have got such short attention span, and it's just the way we're programmed now from all of this content all the time. And that is just the truth of it. It's just that, we're all like, I'm like, people will always send you things like, check out my friend's work, check out this thing, and you go on it, and you're like, literally 2 beats, and if you don't get it, you're like, it's not on me to figure this out, So if you can present but I think about that now with the way I present work on Instagram of like, there's a temptation to be like, I want to post some like personal stuff about whatever goofy shit I'm up to, or, it works for some people, but I'm still thinking about like, if someone lands on there and looks at it, what are those first 6 images they're going to see saying about me and my work? And if I put too many things that are confusing and distracting, I've got a little looser with it over time now. Don't think about it so much, but if you look at it, you're like, it's a dog and some wild horses and some whatnot. It's like, are you a nature photographer? Like, they're not gonna.
What's the stories are for?
Yeah, so I've got to make sure it's like, okay, at least 4 or 5 of these are straight up illustrations, or gig posters, and I can treat myself to one picture of my dog or some wild horses every 20 or something.
Well, it's nice you can pin your top 3. So like that in itself, like practical advice is like, whatever your specific style is, make that your first 3 pinned images. Because I will also say, knowing the person behind it, like beyond you being a killer artist, the other reason I want to reach out to you is I was like, first of all, everyone said how kind you were, but I could see the story of this is a real human behind it. So I could also give you a counter argument.
This is true.
It's like iterative.
I think, well, maybe it's like you said, that's what stories are for thing in terms of that world. And I agree, because I definitely feel like I have I was going to say I think in an authentic way, because it's true and real. Like I haven't conjured up some fake version of a persona as an artist or whatever. It's all just real day-to-day shit if I share it, obviously selective. I'm not going to just share a picture of me cooking a curry or something, but I'm like, or maybe I should get into some culinary sharing, but generally it's all authentic and real stuff, but it definitely helps round out a bit of a personal connection and backstory, and people dig that, to know that the art has been influenced by
but there's a balance,
the environment and all of the lifestyle and environmental stuff, and definitely counts for something, having a bit of a backstory to it and keeping it just hopefully on the right level of sharing. Sometimes get a bit loosey goosey and just share some weird stuff, but generally it's like pretty locked in to like stuff. I just think of it as like, if I feel it's relevant and connected to the output of the art, then that's usually because it truly is, if it's just like taking environmental reference photos, like I'll share those, but I'll take them home and have them in infinite files of things that I will genuinely pull up and use for reference for the illustrations and things like that. So so it all kind of works in turn. It's like, I'm posting a video of me wandering through a forest or whatever, or a bunch of photos of some like moss or something, but it does authentically play into the art that's created as well. So
yeah. I actually got one more question. And when you said cooking curry, it reminded me. Okay, so when you were in Florida and Texas, and let's keep this concise because it might bore people, but please tell me you had some like good Mexican food when you were in America. Because like, does Britain really have good Mexican food? Because I don't think you guys do.
No, it doesn't.
But that's
doesn't.
like one of our. I mean, it's obviously one of Mexican thing, but it's a big American cultural thing. Is eating Mexican food. Yeah,
I love it. It's absolutely the UK does. There must be some exceptions, but I certainly haven't found them. There's like definitely the UK does not know quite what it's doing with Mexican food. It's one of my favorite things to do out there. Is get just good tacos and just any of it really, no matter where. And I did have some pretty good stuff in Florida, actually. Good like tacos.
I bet Austin had some good stuff too. Tex-Mex.
Amazing. Yeah, it's great shit. And they really don't quite know what they're doing. There's a place near here that is like a cafe, but it sells there's Mexican food and cakes. It's so confusing. It's extremely confused about what it is, but it's like looks like a pub but calls itself a cafe but serves Mexican food, and it's like the most yeah, they don't know even ever how to do like a plate of like nachos, which should
Oh
be pretty
man.
should be generally pretty straightforward, like with melting cheese. And yeah, I've had some terrible plates of nachos over here, and I forget sometimes, I forget how bad it is. I'm like, nachos sounds great, but I'm like, I want some of those, like those messy nachos that Kurt Russell is eating in Death Proof, and he's getting them all over his face.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the plate of nachos I always want, even though it's horrible watching him eat them. But like, that's the nachos I want, and it's never the nachos I get over here. So, yeah, quite upsetting. But yeah, always a treat to get out and eat some good Mexican food.
All right. Well, on that note, please follow Richey on Instagram. Like and subscribe to this episode as well as the channel, and new episodes every week. All right. Thank you, Richey. Stay around just for 1 minute.
Lee, thank you so much. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, totally, man. Appreciate it.